Oh, hey, what's going on, everybody? You might be asking yourself, what the hell is a regular episode being played for or uploaded on a Friday? Well, the answer is this. I had a backlog of episodes, and I didn't think it was fair to the guests to sit on them, so I'm doing a little bit of catch-up. So we're going to do a regular episode this Friday. Enjoy, rejoice, whatever you want to do. Before we get into that, you know who this podcast is brought to you by. It's brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. And some people, maybe they have the question like, well, what does it mean to be brought to you by? How does it work? Well, it's really simple. Black Rifle Coffee is one of my favorite brands. I'm obviously deeply personally invested as well, being a partial owner of one up here in the Flathead Valley. But I love the people behind the brand. And they bought out the ad inventory for the next few years. So what does that actually mean? How can you support the podcast? How can you support Black Rifle? Well, it's pretty easy. If you love coffee, if you love supporting veteran-based organizations, go over to blackriflecoffee.com and get all your coffee needs there. And if you don't like coffee, well, I don't know what the fuck to tell you, because that's what they sell. They sell coffee. You can get subscriptions for coffee. You can get subscriptions for merchandise, stickers. I don't think you can get subscriptions for hats. That's a new idea. I'll pitch that to Evan. No big deal. But it's an amazing brand. And I couldn't be more happy to be aligned with them. So the easiest way to support me and this podcast and to allow me to keep doing what I'm doing is to support Black Rifle Coffee. And that's it. Let's talk about my guest today. His name is Marc Malone, and I'm just going to go ahead and read straight from his website, his bio. He's an English-born American philosopher, entrepreneur, policy advisor, and counter-theorist on the science of social engineering. Founder and president of America 21, an anti-globalist organization that seeks to free America from global governance by cutting ties with supranational UN agreements that erode fundamental rights, returning state and national sovereignty to the people, generally a strategic analyst by trade, working as an academic of the Secretary Division at University of Nottingham to data science, behavior analysis, and linguistics in the corporate world. And he studied philosophy of science at Oxford University and a member of the Oxford Philosophical Society. We're getting into it today. We're talking about globalists. Episode number 286 with Marc Malone. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
That is when you know you've
We
made
don't
it.
like to call it that.
Yeah.
We call it the Michael thing.
The Michael thing, yeah. That's when you know you've made it in podcast land, when you can pull things up on the screen.
Right,
You know?
yeah.
Is it? Because at any time in podcast land, you could just pull your phone out and pull stuff up.
It doesn't have the same kind of...
It's not the same
Gravitas,
yeah,
if you will.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same professionalism to it, you know?
Yeah.
Because, you know, my assistant's in Ohio, so I'm like, hey, can you pull something up? And he's like, I'll fax you it. It'll be there in 3 days, you know?
I mean,
It's
that's
not so
better
fun.
than traditional mail,
Yeah.
right? Let's
Yeah.
go glass half full with this.
Carrier pigeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you from originally?
United Kingdom, Birmingham. Have you seen the show Peaky Blinders? The gangster one from Birmingham?
I'm aware of a show
Yeah.
called Peaky Blinders.
That's
I've
where I'm
watched
from.
0 seconds of it.
Yeah.
Is the show accurate?
Well, it's changed a lot. You know, nowadays it might have been somewhat accurate when the culture was a bit more intact. Because, you know, the UK, like blue states in America, has been, transitioned through globalism. You know, through open border migration, through corporate takeover of mum and pops. And because of that, a lot of the culture is gone of what even I remember in the 90s. You know, suddenly now everything's been replaced by McDonald's or, you know, many streets, honestly, they look like you could be in India, you know? And that kind of has a disorienting effect on you as you're kind of trying to figure out who you are as you're growing up, I think.
Isn't that also, to a degree, though, a little bit natural given the ever-increasing population of the world and people migrating about?
There's always been natural migration. Yeah, and I think that's healthy for a society. And America has been built on natural migration, people coming over and helping build the country.
I think all countries were, to a degree. That just depends on how far back you want to look in the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, I'd have to assume at some point there was whatever people may believe. God, that's a debate I don't want to get into.
Sure.
At some point, human beings became.
Yeah.
We'll leave
Right.
everything up until that point for a different time.
No problem. No debates on God versus evolution then.
I mean, I'm totally, here's the thing. I'm open to it. I am not incredibly educated on either. And I also want people to believe whatever they want to and live a happy and fulfilling life. So even if they think the world is flat,
I know a few. Yeah.
quietly, I'm going to externalize my inner voice. Inside I go, God, you're a dum-dum. Outside I go, live your life however you want to.
Yeah.
But I do want them to be happy. I worry about their cognitive processing ability or what may have happened to them in their life leading it up to that point. But at some point, every country was founded via migration, right?
Yeah, and I think the separation that I like to draw is the difference between natural and forced, in the same way that people have always come up from South America or Central America to the United States. But when you just open the border and you destroy it and you purposefully just allow the influx to come in, then that's not a natural migration process. That's something that's been done intentionally to be honest, to change the nature of America's politics, you know, and there's lots of different layers one could look at it from that.
Do you think the border is wide open intentionally? Or actually, how would you describe the border? And I just had a very interesting conversation in LA with a guy who operated at a very high level inside of the BORTAC in Borsar. Actually, Borsar, as a medic who was attached to BORTAC. I don't want to paint him in a way that he did not paint himself. Sure. We had a really interesting conversation about the border and his experience in there and what he was dealing with. Do you think it's open?
Well, I think that it's been intentionally unprotected, and we have the kind of the political framework and literature to prove this. You know, and it depends how far down that we want to go. But, you know, the United Nations Agenda 2030 document, which, you know, all the world leaders, all member states of the United Nations signed, Barack Obama, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, even Vladimir Putin signed it. And the idea is that they have to move, per the document, per the Migration Treaty, 1 billion people into Western civilization by 2030 to 2050. And the reason that they've committed to this is to, quote, reduce the carbon footprint. So their idea is, look, we don't want to bring any more people into the world because that produces carbon dioxide, right? And that's bad for the earth. And we believe that the earth is going to end if carbon dioxide continues to increase. So what we're going to do is we're going to just move cogs around on the machine being the earth. We're just going to move people from Africa or South America or Asia to the West. And that way we're not producing any more carbon dioxide. We're just moving people around.
We're not producing any less, though, either, right? If we just take the same number and aggregate it differently across the marble.
Exactly. And that's the problem. But that's their thinking is, well, the Western structure is going to be better protected against reducing carbon dioxide. So we're going to move all the people in to do the jobs that people aren't having children to do. And we're not going to add any more carbon dioxide, any more carbon footprint to the earth. But this treaty, the Migration Compact, you know, it's part of the 2030 agenda and was signed by most world leaders. Now, Trump didn't sign it. Trump was only one of 11 leaders in the world who didn't sign it. But most
who else was on that list?
I think it was like Saudi Arabia, a couple of different Arab countries, but most countries did sign it. But of course, prior leadership and post leadership have also agreed to the terms of that agreement. So they've all agreed that we're moving people in based on carbon footprint. So then when we look at the open border situation, or we look at sanctuary cities, there's a more permanent reason why that is allowed to happen, and that's because it suits the overall agenda of the United Nations project.
What would you do to protect the U.S. border more? What would you change about our policies?
Well, I think that I'm not an expert in this field like you as far as like military security and things like this, but I think
the military is not involved in border security.
Right, so I know it's customs and border protection, but I do think that proper resource would have to be applied there. I think proper resource would have to be applied to defend it as if our national security depends on it, because it does in many ways. So I think we should be prioritizing that instead of perhaps sending money to other countries. That could be one way we justify the cost. We could justify the cost just on the fact that the Sanctuary City project costs us like $300 billion a year. You know,
break down for me the Sanctuary City project.
So Sanctuary Cities, a lot of states have where an illegal immigrant may come in and they're allowed to stay in the city without being evicted by Customs Border Protection. And the idea is that the state says this is a sanctuary for migrants, no matter their documentation, and therefore, you know, you have no jurisdiction here. You know, we're a constitutional system. We're a state. We get to decide what we do with these people.
Yeah.
And I understand that that system is a good system. It makes sense. But the problem is that all the American taxpayers are paying the cost for that, not just the California one. You know, it's federal money that's being spent on it. So if California truly wants that, then that should be their responsibility to pay for, right? So that's where we're having the issue. But we have estimates of around 30 million illegal immigrants in America just in the past couple of decades.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me number-wise. One of the things that the Border Patrol agent did talk about was not only resources, but, trying to find the right people who want to do the job for the right reason. And he was of Hispanic lineage. I want to say origin, but I don't think that's correct. And again, I don't want to misstep and characterize him as something he wouldn't describe himself. Not necessarily sequitur. What we're talking about was an interesting conversation, the interactions that he would have with the people crossing the border, them looking at him going, what the fuck, man?
Right, yeah.
Let me in. He's like, no, man, that's not how this shit works. And he didn't speak Spanish. Right. And he said it would get interesting, to say the least. Resourcing was one thing that I think there's always room for improvement on that. I mean, let's talk about resources when it comes to the public school system, right? Like we could go down this fucking rabbit hole or tree branches, whatever you want to, as far as places we could make improvement. Yeah. What I will say, though, I think from a policy perspective, he wouldn't describe it as having an open border, and I don't necessarily know how to, I don't know how to handle the one, I'm assuming it's each individual state is making their, whether it's the cities that you're talking about where people can either be removed or not. That's happening at a state level, correct?
Yeah, so the state determines, whether this city is sanctuary, and the city can determine it too, so that there's, again, the constitutional power is really supposed to be as close as possible, which is a good thing. Yeah,
I mean, the 10th Amendment exists for that, right?
Yep.
To pass those powers down from the Constitution to the states.
Yep.
That's one that's going to have to be dealt with at a local level for sure. The same argument can be applied to, we all pay taxpayer dollars, but here in Montana, are people from Florida paying money to fix the roadways here?
Right.
I would love to see, and again, not necessarily germane to the conversation, I would love to see exactly where my taxpayer dollars go. Not only would I love to see it, I'd love to be able to direct it towards exactly where it goes. Every fucking penny. Because my concern is nobody knows.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
That when you ask them for that information, they go, ooh, that's such an awesome question. We probably should figure that out. However, we have no plan to do so.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's an impossible task. I'm not even sure. But yeah, from the Border Patrol perspective, he's not current anymore. So he still has relationships with the Border Patrol, but he didn't describe it as open. He described it as challenging. He did a very good job of breaking down the role of Border Patrol and how it fits into other organizations, and almost how Border Patrol is blamed for a lot of things that are more of an immigration issue, an ICE issue.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And how those are separate, and what their job is and who they hand off to, and then what happens beyond that is actually past their purview, but they're oftentimes the whipping boy organization for it. They're very... It seems like it's a lot of people are pretty quick to shit on the Border Patrol, but then they also couldn't define what their job is. So
they do an essential job, just as many forces do. In the country, it's an essential one. And just looking at the politics of it, it is largely down to the state and the cities deciding. Yeah. Again, so here's something interesting, because this is sort of how these global agreements all tie together. So Trump also pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. And the Paris Climate Accord is very much linked to the Migration Compact and the 2030 Agenda. So Obama signs in, and then Joe Biden re-signs in to the Paris Climate Accord. Now, when Trump pulled out of it, 212 U.S. cities signed right back on. So he pulls the country of America out. But, then you look at San Francisco, Los Angeles, whatever. They sign back on and they say, well, we'll participate in this globalist agreement regardless of what the executive of the country decides to do.
I didn't even know a city could sign on to an agreement like that. Is that the first time that's happened?
I think, well, in a sense, it really began where this whole global project began with Agenda 21 in 1992. But that's really where local governments began to work with global supranational bodies on subverting the national sovereignty of the country, in this case, very much so in the United States. So 1992, that really began.
Break that down for me.
So, the climate alarmism began in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's really where this issue began. And, the organizations like Club of Rome, but really it began picking up a lot of steam in the 80s. And this is where books like Limits to Growth were written. And this is where they say, hey, look, capitalism has limits. We can't just grow for the sake of growing. We need to change the economic system. And we need to change it we're not going to call it communism anymore. We're going to call it sustainability. And sustainability is now our goal. And sustainability just happens to mean that we have to, control and regulate resources differently. And in doing so, you may lose some freedoms, but overall, we'll save the earth, and that's worthwhile. And this is really where it begins to pick up steam, limits to growth, etc. By 1992, 179 nations, including the Vatican, as a city-state, signed on to Agenda 21, which is the agenda for the 21st century. United Nations, George H.W. Bush led that effort, and he basically said, yeah, we need to do this. Climate change is the biggest problem we face. So we're going to have to change how we approach capitalism, economics, government, everything, education, migration. And the document is like 200 pages. I have it on our website, which can be read over, and I have done a detailed breakdown of it. But basically it says to protect land, water, and air, to protect the natural resources from this carbon dioxide problem, we have to upend the entire political system. And in doing so, we have to focus locally. That was the key thing. Local government was mentioned hundreds more times than national government. So this is really where we start to see this breakdown of national sovereignty begin in 92 with this agreement. And it's basically to say, hey, look, if you have a city, your city can dictate the terms of carbon dioxide emissions. And that means that it's so funny because on the surface, it sounds kind of trivial because, hey, I genuinely care about the environment. I genuinely care about the earth. I love nature and I want us to protect it. I don't want to be dumping toxic waste into the oceans or into the rivers. I care about it too. But what they're talking about with, reducing CO2 is controlling all resources because everything produces CO2. We literally breathe CO2. Farming produces it, obviously driving cars, manufacturing. Mm-hmm. There's literally nothing a human being can't do without even breathing, that doesn't produce CO2. So the problem comes in when you really look at what they're trying to achieve is that it is the most totalitarian political project in human history because it far supersedes the imposition of even communism because it's every detail of one's life. How much you heat your home, how many times you have a shower, how many times you flush your toilet, where you get your food from. And, 1992, this wasn't so obvious. Where we are today, it becomes much more obvious how that's working through, ESG, CO2 credit scores and things like that. So anyway, so local governments began signing on them. And the focus of the United Nations through subsidiary organizations, like UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, ICLEI, all these things, they basically start training local governments in 1995, 1996 to adopt all this framework. That means changing how cities do business. And then when we get to 2015, 2030 agenda comes in, which says by 2030, we want to achieve X, Y, Z. We want to achieve all these sustainable development goals. And that means upending things quickly. So since 92 and big time since 2015, cities have been signing on to these agreements, bypassing the nation state completely and bypassing the executive of the country, Trump being the primary.
What's the end state? What are they shooting for?
By their own words, control of all natural resources to save the earth from climate disaster.
Control by who?
That's the $1 million question. That's why I'm so concerned by it. That's why I fight so hard against it, because who gets to be the guarantor of these rights, right? Who gets to be the guarantor of controlling these resources? Now, they will say typically, well, your local government will be the one who's in control of it, right? Your local government will be the steward of climate change. But the reality is, where do the local governments get their support, their funding from? Well, they get it from BlackRock through ESG social credit scores. They get it from World Economic Forum corporate stakeholders. So really, a lot of the money and a lot of the power is global. The local government is just literally the administration of a global project of global money. BlackRock's ESG is $40 trillion of money. That basically says we're only going to put money into who are environmental, socially liberal, and who work on these sustainable development goals. In other words, all the leftist, super Marxist cities are going to get all the money. And any of the conservative ones are not going to get the money until they bend and start doing things the way we want them to do it. And if they don't, we have all the money. $40 trillion of slush fund. That's the GDP of North America and Europe combined. So that's pretty much where the actual center of money and power is coming from. And why wouldn't it? They have everything to gain. There's nothing to gain for a major corporation or financial institution in national sovereignty, right? Because you create friction with business. You're creating borders, you're creating regulations, tariffs. That's awful for a global corporation. But an open world where you can just trade on one regulation, unlimited opportunity, unlimited money, right? I don't have to adapt to American regulations, right? Because it's the same as Europe, it's the same as China. So the end goal for them is just open border trade, And that means unlimited migration of people, because then we don't really have to worry about, those pesky rights and wages that people need in the West that they've become so accustomed to. We can pay them anything if they come from other parts of the world. But it's really that open border trade that they're going for on the private side. And on the public side and the political side, most of them genuinely probably believe they are trying to save the earth. That's why they're so fervent about it, But, it's also a cynical attempt to gain power that in a way that just never could have been done before, even with communism and fascism. I'm not saying it's that kind of violence. I'm not saying it's going to become that forceful. But in terms of the intricacy and the imposition on people's lives, it will be far more detailed.
What are your personal thoughts on climate change? Real or a talking point?
Well, I think the climate is changing, for sure. I don't think it's caused by human beings, And you
think human beings have no impact on it?
I haven't seen sufficient evidence to show human beings have any significant impact on it. And in fairness, the Queensland University had scientists submit around 11,200 scientific papers on this subject, and only a third believed that humans had a significant cause on it. Actually, most scientists were undecided, but they keep trotting it out as if they said, oh no, 97% of scientists agree. No, 97% of scientists submitted reports on it. Only 1/3 of those believe that humans are the primary cause of climate change. Most are undecided.
97% of scientists submitted paperwork?
Of scientists on the kind of experts on the subject.
Okay, I was going to say, that seems like a extremely fucking made up number, that 97% of all scientists.
But that's what they say. They keep trotting that out. They keep saying, well, 97% of scientists agree. Everyone agrees, right? You're in the wrong. Everyone agrees that, COVID-19 is XYZ and then suddenly 2 years later, not everyone agrees anymore, and this is a logical fallacy. It's appeal to consensus. The idea that just because everyone agrees on something that makes it true. Well, that doesn't make it true just because everyone agrees. A lot of people believe that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were good leaders, right? Just because people believe it doesn't make it true.
Well, very different parties of people believe that.
Sure.
And oftentimes they were directly benefiting from the actions of those individuals. So it probably made them a little bit more likely to land on that side.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that we're not I don't think we're having much. I just haven't seen much evidence to suggest. For example, in the atmosphere right now, we have about 0.04% carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Right, 0.04%. Most of it is water vapor. Most of what is in the atmosphere is not carbon dioxide. In actuality, we have about 400 parts. I think it's about 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide right now. If we go down to 150 parts per million, many scientists that I've read about would say that plant life would struggle to even exist at that low amount. We've been as high as 2,000 parts or 4,000 parts per million in the past, and I assume that's probably around the birth of the Industrial Revolution. So we've been way higher before. It's actually only trace amounts right now. And what I'm concerned about is not just the destruction to our way of life. I mean, our ancestors struggled so hard to provide civilization, to build civilization. And I'm worried that we're going to destroy it all over a false alarm. And I'm also worried about the tyrants that are going to use that to take control of us on an intricate level. And if people think that I'm overreacting, just go back to 2020 and 2021. I lived in Southern California when my son was born. A drone was following me around when I was walking my dog in April 2020. There was a drone above my head saying, you need to go home, lockdown. So we've experienced...
The drone was saying that?
A drone, yeah. There was a drone above my head in April 2020.
With like a speaker?
Yep. I had a speaker, yeah.
Who was flying it?
I have no idea. No idea. I was just kind of in shock because I was walking my dog opposite the apartment complex.
So do you assume it was a tyrant of some kind, or maybe it was somebody who put a speaker and a GoPro on a drone?
No, I assume it was like the government, because they had them in the United Kingdom and Australia as well. They were sending drones out to monitor whether people were breaking lockdown rules. My family back in England were saying, yeah, there were drones in London and places like that, and we know that we had them in Australia, basically to scan the area to see if people were breaking lockdown. Now, we didn't have that in a lot of America, of course, but the point that I'm making is that tyranny was very real and very recent. And it wasn't that long ago that half the world, you couldn't do anything without a vaccine passport. I couldn't even go back to California until 2022. Couldn't do anything without a vaccine passport, without a vaccine. Couldn't even get into a bar or a restaurant. So, I don't think I'm overreacting to say that they will grab that power if it is given to them.
Yeah, I'm not here to say who's overreacting and who's not, but...
No, I know.
The other side of that coin is that people were making the best decisions that they thought that they were capable of doing on the information that they had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that both federal and local governments made was in their messaging and their inability just to say something very simple. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or this is the information we were basing this decision off of, and guess what? Here's the information that we have now. It was one of the biggest failures for me in that was in the messaging of the why. If you don't explain to people the why, or you give them an unsatisfactory explanation of that why, it's going to develop friction. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it could be viewed as tyranny, but I think a lot of people would push back on that and they would say, what would you have wanted us to do instead, given the limited information that we had?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that we had, so my background, I grew up in the ghettos, single mother, dad died when I was a kid, welfare, food stamps, that's my background. But it happened to, God graced me with a decent enough cognitive function that I could expand my awareness and get into decent disciplines. You know, I studied philosophy of science, which is scientific methods and how we approach science. Mm-hmm. I worked in data science and as an analyst in academia and in the corporate world in America since I've been here. So looking at data models, it was obvious to me that that initial data model was completely inaccurate. And there's a few different reasons for that, but primarily the Italian data that came out at the end of March showed us that this replication rate of the virus was not what the United Nations World Health Organization was saying, which is exponential. They were saying this is an exponential growth. Impossible. Exponential growth would be like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. And it's just impossible. Nothing grows like that. So it was linear. So it was like, 2, 4, 6, 8, and over time. And that was just kind of what we could piece together from China, which we can't really trust the data there, but Italy for sure. And then I was like, I calculated the data based on that and end of March and said, well, it looks much more likely that we will lose about 50 to 80,000 and not, 2.5 million, 2.1 million. And by 2022, once we removed all the comorbidities, which inflated the deaths by 16.4 times, based on the fact that they had cancer or heart disease and they were just COVID-19 was on death certificate, that 50 to 80,000 was accurate in terms of what COVID alone killed. Now, there are way smarter men than me, especially who work in these disciplines and who advise governments. We also knew at the beginning that there were effective treatments. I recommended on 5th of April 2020 2-deoxyglucose, which is a protein inhibitor. It inhibits viral replication. Mm-hmm. The Department of Defense in India and Nature, the #1 science journal in the world, came out in the summer of 2021 and said 2-deoxyglucose cures COVID-19. I was like, well, I said that on 5th of April. Again, there are smarter people than me. And the government have smarter people. Pfizer have smarter people. So then we have to ask the question, was it really that they didn't know? Or was it really that they wanted to capitalize on the fear for power? And I lean in that direction.
Or was it that they couldn't find a consensus among experts? Because you could find experts, people who have literally dedicated their life to the medical profession or whatever it may be, standing on both sides of that line.
Yeah.
Screaming at each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's what becomes one of the most confusing things for, speaking about myself here, the layperson who, for most of your life, I don't know if you're necessarily taught or it's just kind of the way you grow up. Like you go to the doctor, you trust the guy that's in the white lab suit, right? Like, hey man, my throat hurts. Like, okay, here, check your throat. You have, I don't know, whatever you would get antibiotics for. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work on viruses or something. I'm not a doctor for clarity, people. You know what I mean? And
me neither, by the way. Just to put that caveat out there.
But so you go to the doc and you see your doc and you trust what they say because they have dedicated their life to that. Mm-hmm. It leaves people in a little bit of an adrift position when you have people who are all wearing the same outfit, screaming different things.
Right.
And then you also have access to unlimited information through your anxiety rectangle that you can scroll through.
Yeah.
And I hope people realize this. The more you look for one particular thing, the more you find of that particular thing. And again, go down whatever path you want to. Just realize that you can, even in your search results, be loading up a bias that you may not even be recognizing. The algorithm is recognizing what it is that you like. Like, oh, this person wants to see more of this. Mm-hmm. Confirmation bias is certainly real. And maybe I'm naive to think this. I still to this day, even from what I've seen in humanity, I have faith that human beings at a baseline level are good. Not everybody. Don't get me wrong. I know that we exist with some fucking monsters out there walking around in skin suits just like you and I are. But for the most part, I think people do the best they can. So
I agree, by the way. Yeah.
you have both of those people, speaking specifically on medical professionals, COVID-19, whatever, X side of the argument, Y side of the argument. They both took the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. How in the fuck are the rest of us in the middle supposed to separate the wheat from the chaff on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. And I agree with you. My worldview is that most people are generally doing their best. We're all suffering through life. We all have our traumas.
That's a good way to put it.
We are, right? We're all like trying to get by with the crushing rock that is on our back. And we're all trying to like get by and be successful while not crushing other people with that weight. And I think that's the duty of a good man. And it's what Jesus teaches us, carry your cross and follow me. You have to carry it. Like you have to move forward. But my thing on that is I'm really talking about just a few people that are those non-humans in flesh suits that you're talking about. My view on this, and I look at this sort of like sociologically, it's not so much that I don't believe it's kind of funny to say after everything we just talked about, but I don't believe most things are conspiracy. Very few things are conspiracy.
What's your favorite conspiracy? Not to interrupt you.
Oh, right. Well,
what's the one that you're like at night when you can't sleep? You're just like, yes, I'm going to get into this.
Well, to be honest, it's the consolidation of global power. It's the one that we've been talking about.
Damn it! I hope you're going to say Bigfoot or something.
Well, actually, I tell you,
what's your second favorite?
If we want to go down kind of the woo territory, the thing that fascinates me is this Nephilim idea from the Bible, like this non-human force that lives among us. So are
you talking Star Wars?
No. So because
I can't. I'm just like.
In Genesis, there's the fallen angels that kind of breed with men in Genesis, right? And the idea is like since the beginning, there's been this like half fallen angel, half demon, half human being here. That idea fascinates me. I wouldn't nail my colors to that flag. Wouldn't be the hill I would die on.
I feel like I've seen a Keanu Reeves movie about this.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, Constantine.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there was kind of there was some rule, and they couldn't directly mess with humans, but they could manipulate, but they couldn't actually interact.
Yeah, and that's because in the Christian worldview, the idea is that God created the rules, so the demons and Satan can influence free will, but can't overcome free will, can just influence it. So I would say that's probably my favorite because that's a fascinating idea to me to think that them all the way back to the beginning, there's maybe non-humans here. I just think that's really interesting. But
aliens, real or fake? We're gonna get to the root cause of some of this shit right now. We're cutting to the bone.
I think it's more like interdimensional, not aliens. If I'm gonna go in that direction.
All right.
Yeah.
The multiverse, is it real?
I don't think it's a multiverse. I think it's more like a fourth, third dimension thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have philosophical and scientific reasons for that. Right. So third dimension's matter, fourth dimension space-time, fifth dimension would be outside space and time, which would be God. So, we're looking at three different layers of reality all happening at the same time, and that's kind of quantum physics.
Bigfoot.
No. That's a dude who got wasted once wearing a monkey suit running around. And then people have been talking about it for like 100 years. And I bet it was a dare or something.
I just feel like there's so many game cameras out there now from hunting as like technology has evolved that somebody somewhere would have gotten a picture of Bigfoot. Is the Earth round or flat?
Maybe it's like an egg. Maybe it's like an oval shape. That's
a bullshit down the middle answer.
Yeah, I'll go with round. I'll stick with the scientific consensus on that one.
Michael, what other conspiracy theories are there?
So I just heard a really good one.
Oh, yes.
I've been watching, there's this 8-hour-long video by this YouTuber. He goes down a whole list.
He just is listing conspiracies?
Yes. His name's Wendigoon, by the way. Shout out. But he had one on the Titanic and the Olympia. And so what he was saying was the Titanic didn't actually sink. The Titanic and the Olympia were two very similar ships. The Olympia had a hole in it, and to repair it would cost so much money, and so they switched the names of the Titanic and the Olympia. So the one with the hole, which was the Titanic, quote unquote, went out, got sunk for an insurance claim so that they didn't have to fix the Olympia, but they crashed the Olympia, quote unquote.
That seems pretty reasonable, actually.
And there's actually
Yeah.
kind of a
That's
lot
the problem
of,
with some of these conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
They bounce up against reasonability far too often. And then,
Yes.
of course, the biggest issue is some conspiracy theories end up being true.
Well, I remember
Which leads
saying-
people to go, God damn it, they're all true. It's like,
No.
that might be too much.
Agreed. Yeah, and a lot of them definitely, are like, and from a philosophical standpoint, I try to reject any totalitarian thinking of any kind. The reality is that things are true based on their own merit, whatever the thing is. Be it on our side, be it on their side, doesn't matter. The reality is we have to take each argument as it comes. And I really try to avoid ideology. That's really important because conspiracy theory can become an ideology.
For sure. It becomes people's entire identity, too.
Yes, it does. And I've seen it happen, where it's like, okay, because we have this consolidation of global power, which we can easily talk about and trace, and I've got all the documentation and it's all out in the open. They don't hide any of it. Everything we've talked about, 2030 agenda, Great Reset, all of it's out in the open. They're very proud of it. So, but, that means then you can go from that and say, well, then everything else that relates to people taking global power must also be true. And it's like, well, no, things have to be proved based on their own merit at it, one argument at a time. I was going to mention before, like, very few things really are forced. Most things are sociologically kind of driven in the sense that we as human beings, we follow strong leadership. And it's because that's how we evolved. That's how we survived, Men like you who went out and stopped the barbarians coming to the gate are the only reason that we are alive today. Without that, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't exist. The women and children wouldn't have been protected to continue to procreate for us to continue to grow as a people. Likewise, had people not come in and developed new inventions and new ways of healing people, we also wouldn't be here. These things are essential. So then strong leadership and incentives drive behavior. And those who control the incentives and have strong leadership will decide in the direction things go. So really the way that I look at it is the Great Reset 2030 people just come along and they've just instituted a strong alternative leadership to national sovereignty, to nationhood, to sovereignty, to patriotism. And they've said, we've got a different vision for the world that eradicates division and discrimination. And we're going to eradicate all that. And we're going to save the earth doing it. And that's, appealing, especially to younger people. And then...
Do younger people not realize that it's impossible to eradicate disparities and discrimination, and that equality of opportunity is fantastic, equality of outcome is impossible?
Exactly. Well, but that's the thing. I don't think they do, but the people that are driving that understand that. They know that that's not possible, right? The Klaus Schwabs and the Rockefeller Foundation, all that, they understand. They know this. They know. But they understand it's a very cynical and easy way to gain power. So then you have strong leadership, which drives people from this strong leadership. But then the other thing is the incentives. This is why the ESG program, the environmental social governance, social credit score that businesses are currently operating under, that if you operate on this social credit score, that BlackRock, Fidelity, State Street, all these investment firms and the central banks, Federal Reserve, Bank of England, etc., they all are signed on to this idea.
They've signed on to the idea, or they're actually using it right now? I've heard the term social credit score. Can you break down for me exactly what that is? Yeah,
so this is the incentive part which drives behavior, right? So that's why I'm saying that most of it isn't conspiracy. Most of it is just driven through incentives. They set the incentives and people follow, right? As you would. So ESG, environmental social governance, this really kicked off in 2015. BlackRock have become the kind of leader of it. And they have 10.
And when you say BlackRock, you're talking about the investment firm.
That's right, the investment firm.
Are they the largest investment firm on earth?
I think they
value.
Yes, as a single firm, I believe that they are.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have about 10.
Are.
They have 10 trillion in assets, right?
8.6 trillion.
8.6, and then I think Vanguard's the next one, which they have about 6 trillion in assets, I think. And then you have Fidelity and State Street and stuff like that. So when you bring all these investment firms together, you're looking at $20 to $30 trillion in assets, I suppose, right? So, and then you combine that with the central banks that actually print and control the money. So yes, they've signed on to the ESG framework. And what I mean by signed on is that they've agreed that this is a good way for us to financially motivate people towards this direction. So through that, you get zero interest loans or lower interest loans if you do the following. If you lower your CO2 production, which means if you produce cars, if you do manufacturing, if you do anything that Trump actually supported, or anything that is going to make us a sovereign, independent nation, you don't get the low interest loans. Social part is your social communism. If you don't have enough LGBT, enough people of color. If you have too many straight white men in your business, you lose points and you have to get a higher interest loan. And the final part, the governance part, the ESG, environmental social governance, is the sustainable development goals, the Agenda 2030. And how in line with that are you? How in line with these 17 goals are you? So if you operate on this social credit score, which exists and has done since 2015, PayPal, Facebook, everybody submits to this, including Wells Fargo, including Bank of America. They submit social credit scores. They submit ESG scores to BlackRock and these investment firms.
As a firm, they do on individuals?
No, as an organization and how they operate as an organization, right? So basically what that means is, but there are some banks that do it on individuals like Merrill Lynch and some of the...
How do they get that information?
Based on the bank statements and based on all the information you give them, right? Your gender, your marital status, your work and all of that, your ethnicity. But no, as far as an organization, so basically what it means is that PayPal are financially incentivized to get rid of as many straight white men as possible. They actually get access to cheaper capital doing that. That's just one example. There's other examples. Conservatives.
Where does it say that?
Well, it's about social. It says social equity, right? It says diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion, by definition, is a protected class that does not include straight white men. So that's the classification. That's the definition. And Twitter and all the social media organizations say the same thing. We're not a protected class, right? So that doesn't include us, diversity and inclusion and all of those things. We don't have to be
Shouldn't
included.
everybody be a protected class?
The individual is supposed to be the protected class, right? That's the idea of this country. It's why, the idea of why people sailed on a boat away from England to get away from the monarchy was because they wanted to get away from this idea that we don't get to govern our own lives. We don't get to be the master of our own destiny. So the idea is, we should all be as individuals protected classes. That's the idea. But, they don't like that idea, and there's a strategy to this that's been deployed. And the strategy is, if you want to upend a system, you have to cause a divide in the system, and you have to get the population to hate the primary supporting base of that system. So in other words, if the primary supporting base of America is straight white men, for argument's sake, then you would want everyone to hate them because you're trying to get this American thing over with. You're trying to deconstruct it to be consolidated into the global power system. No nations, no borders, open border trade. So then you're going to be targeting whoever is the primary supporting block of that, because get them down, you get the system down, and you can upend it, and you can change it. So it's not just about white men by any means. Anyone who has the wrong view, any Christian, any conservative. Like I've got a good friend who's Croatian Mexican, and he's been banned from PayPal and stuff like this, right? Because political views, political dissident.
How did he express those views?
Well, by basically saying a lot of the same stuff that I'm saying. Yeah, by basically saying that, COVID-19 was a totalitarian project, and that...
Is that what you believe? That it was a totalitarian project? That it was an experiment from flash to bang?
Well, I think it's a combination, like we talked about before.
But for control, right? An exercise in control?
I think primarily the exercise was to psychologically change the nature of the population. Mm-hmm.
I think they did, but I don't think they changed it in the way that you might think that they did.
I hope so.
Because I don't think people would tolerate it again. I think they actually, if that was their goal,
mm-hmm.
if their goal was to change the psychological nature and get people more likely to be compliant
mm-hmm.
and follow broad structure and restrictions,
mm-hmm.
I think they shot themselves in the foot. Because if that was what they were trying to do, they took it too far, to the point where people basically got to the point where they said, fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly happened here, and there's a lot of people confuse California for the fucking beach.
Sure.
I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, so just up the coast. You go 20 miles inland, California becomes dark red.
Mm-hmm.
New York's kind of the same way, right? There's pockets of blue, and of course, the voting population is centered. A lot of the policies are created in those areas. I got plenty of friends
mm-hmm.
in very blue states that got to the point with people who leaned to the left, were like, fuck all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't going to do it, and I don't think they would do it again.
Yeah.
I think that exercise in control, if that's what it was, actually failed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I saw it fail a lot too. I live in South Dakota, and it failed pretty quickly in South Dakota. Lockdowns lasted all of about 2 weeks into end of March 2020 and never look back.
So let's say COVID-19. Let's say, and I made a mistake. I was like, oh, COVID-21, and somebody reached. That's not how they label them. Like, fuck
Sure.
you. I'm not a scientist, asshole.
Yeah.
For the sake of the conversation, COVID-23 comes out.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the lockdown would last 2 weeks at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody up there with this grand architecture and design to create this globalist empire took a step backwards, if that is actually what they were trying to do, in my opinion, at least.
No, I think in many ways that's true, because I've never seen so many people actually wake up to tyranny in my lifetime. Well, gosh, probably haven't. My great-grandfather flew the Spitfire in the Battle of Britain, defending Britain against Nazi invasion.
That's a badass fucking airplane, by
Yeah.
the way.
So
The sound of that plane
It's
is
a bit
what
of
I
a
love.
beast.
It's
Yeah.
only better when the machine gun is going off. The combination of those two things, I was about to say the trifecta, and then I realized it requires a third thing. So we'll say the pilot in the cockpit, obviously wearing a scarf, of course.
Yep.
That's a trifecta.
Yeah. So really, since his day and since that war was won, have we not really been face to face with tyranny in the West in any kind of meaningful sense? So we were, and that kind of awoken people to really appreciating freedom again. And that's important, and sovereignty. So yes, I think in that aspect, there was a huge backfire, and that's good. And we want to continue that going. That being said, they did also destroy the global economy and financially switch $40 trillion thereabouts.
What do you mean?
Well, the working and middle classes through 2020 and 2021 lost something between 20 and $30 trillion, as reported by the Telegraph. And likewise, many of the richer, more powerful people actually gained 20 to $30 trillion in revenue over the course of that period. So economically, they got a lot from that process, right? Whether intentional or not doesn't matter. The point is they economically gained a lot. The very people that also, want to see this global governance project. And global governance is what it is. It's not world government, and that's really critical. World government is a conspiracy hypothesis that is not documented in any meaningful or serious sense. What I'm talking about is global governance, which is very different. That's everywhere. Council on Foreign Relations, United Nations. You can find it on the Trilateral Commission. You can find it everywhere. You can find it in national security documents of the federal government. And global governance is what we're really looking at, which is not like a central, some kind of some dark force government is going to come into the center of the world and take over everything. That's not what we're really looking at. What we're looking at is just a breakdown of sovereignty in nations and a consolidation of that power into more of a decentralized global network, not unlike the European Union. Right, so the old country, United Kingdom, left the European Union because the European Union is that. It is a central point of unelected politicians called the European Commission who create the laws for an entire continent of 28 countries, and they're not even voted in. So this exists already. This kind of model exists. So that's what global governance would be similar to what the EU is.
How many countries have left the EU?
Just one, just Britain.
How's the EU doing?
I don't think it depends on how much funnel and resources put into it from the very actors we're talking about. But if it was left to its own devices, I don't think it would survive. It's a very unnatural process, right?
So isn't that a petri dish for people to see a little bit into the future when they see, if this exists and people can look at it and countries are already backing out of it?
Yep.
How would that not replicate itself on an even larger scale? Because when I hear you just talking about the environment, borderless, to do that would have to be the destruction of the founding documents of this country. Right? Like we would have to, as a nation, cease to exist.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, I think that you could just get it to the point, though, where people just don't care about it enough anymore. And
How?
that would work. Well, through enough demoralization, right, that eventually people just stop caring. Right? And then once people stop fighting, the document is only as good as people that want to fight for it. So the reality is if you can get people just like in New York and Los Angeles and lots of these major cities, they don't care about that document anymore. So then you've got them to the point.
That's a pretty broad statement. I don't know if people would answer like that. You know what? I don't think people have an understanding of what the document actually is.
Sure.
I think the farther we have gone from the signing of that document, the less understanding of the importance of that document for most people. It's like the safest time for human beings in the history of human beings, which probably will I don't know. Maybe that's the normal way of things as we evolve as a species until we nuke each other off the fucking planet and start over again at algae or
let's
whatever.
hope not.
Yeah, God. Again, that's a conversation for a different day. But we live in a pretty soft world.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people have any idea or understanding of what you had described of what would motivate a group of people, a large group of people for that, to leave the country that they were from to head west, right? And create something new. For those people, it couldn't have had more meaning, right? Like probably defined who they were. Like that to get, and fuck, you look at like the danger in just that journey alone.
Yeah.
It'd be like standing against the side of a river, knowing that you can't swim, but whatever's on the other side of that is so valuable. Right. Like, I'm going to go for it. I don't know how deep this is. Maybe it's like shin deep. Maybe I'm going to drown, but it means so much to me. I'm going to go for it. You know, the next generation after that, the second generation of Americans, does it mean as much? My guess would be pretty close. Like it still has a very deep and entrenched meaning. But then the third generation, and the fourth generation, the fifth generation, I think more than anything, people have lost an understanding of what it actually means. And they're also being told they're wrong for thinking it's important,
right,
and being proud of it.
Agreed. And that's really what I mean is that there's an approach that could go in that direction too, where the document remains, but people's affinity to it and passion to retain it goes. And that's one way as well to take down a society of any kind. Demoralization, and it has happened. It happened, you know, in the Eastern Europe with the Bolshevik takeover, and it does happen to people where they become so disillusioned and they become so hedonistic and they lose sight of the transcendent meaning of life, the important things, you know, the true, the good, and the beautiful, that it just kind of becomes easy to dissolve. Now, I don't think we're going to go down that path. I don't. But the reason that I do this work is just to, like having life insurance or like having fire insurance, is to try to defend against it as much as possible. I hope that all my work and my time is wasted and that nothing actually happens.
That's an odd statement.
Yeah.
I can understand where you're coming from, for sure. Define for me a globalist. It's a term that is thrown out often.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to your particular definition of it. If you were to ask me that question, I wouldn't be able to give you a great one.
Yeah.
I'd be able to tell you that I hear a lot about it, but don't pay much attention to it.
Sure. Yeah, and it's not really a term that I use. Typically, I would use technocrats.
Well, now you have to define that one too.
I'll define that one. But typically, globalists would just be defined as someone who is that individual, that corporate or NGO individual that has no specific interest in any nation or I guess identity, and really just cares about, you know, the global trade and opening up of the world. I would call it technocrat because that's really what we're dealing with. That's what the mode of governance has been in the last few years. That's what COVID-19's mode of governance was. What we're not really witnessing communism. We're seeing elements of social communism come through, but it's really what we're looking at is technocracy. And that's what happened in 2020. Technocracy is the science of social engineering. It is basically experts dictating policy through technology. Experts dictate policy through technology. Now,
hasn't that been the case since the inception of human beings?
I mean,
the technology was like from a warfare perspective when the bow and arrow was created.
Sure. Yeah.
Galactic leap forward. There was a lot of influence that was able to be exerted because of that. Right. Then the cannon, or, you know, obviously I understand people. I'm skipping a few warfare technology leaps along the way, but I'm just trying to make a point, I guess.
Play devil's advocate is good. What I'm talking about is how Fauci became the leadership and no longer President Trump. And in 2020, what happened is now suddenly the authority that people actually voted for to be the authority has been superseded by somebody that wasn't voted for. And they dictated the terms of the country.
I put that on Trump's desk, though.
Yeah,
I would have put that on, well, I'm going to put that on anybody's desk who had that seat at that time. He happened to be occupying the seat at that time. And so actually he rolled out of that. What would you say from their definition, the middle of the pandemic, the election in 2022, so Feb? Yeah.
Yes, about middle, yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, so that's equally shared in whoever's sitting at that desk. That is a failure of the system in my mind. It should not have worked like that.
No, and I get that. You know, so the idea, though, is that Fauci as the quote expert, gets to dictate the policy and the regulation of the country, and he did.
He tried.
He had a good amount of power for a long time, though, for someone who wasn't the executive of the country.
Montana did a little bit of this. They're like, hold on, I got something for you under the table.
Yeah,
that's what they did to Fauci, along with a lot of other states, and that's one of the beauties, I think, of having 50 states.
Yes,
and having the 10th Amendment, right, where we can empower the states. Like the federal government is the baseline. You want to be more restrictive, you knock yourself out.
Yes.
So some people gave Fauci a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
Others didn't.
100%. And actually, I've worked with your government here a lot. Montana government. I've worked with your representatives. I've worked with some of your state senators.
One of their I think it's is it John Tester's office that's right underneath us, Michael?
Yes, I walk past his office.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I've worked with a lot of your legislators very closely in the last couple of years, and they've invited me out to do talks to the legislatures. I've spoken to a lot of people in Montana. I've been to Montana a lot, and we've been successful in peeling some of this back in your state government. I worked and advised them on many of these things, from Biden's 30 by 30 agreement, which is to take 30% of the land by 2030. It's an Agenda 2030 agreement that he signed, federal executive order.
What are they going to do with that land?
Conserve it to save the earth from climate change. But of course, what they're not going to...
I'm not against conservation. I don't know if that's...
30% of the land's a lot, though. The 30% of the landmass of the country.
Yeah, except you could fit the entire population of the U.S. in the state of Texas.
Yeah. I'm not so much worried about that. I'm more worried about the fact that we suddenly wouldn't have access to, nature, natural resources, right? Food, hunting,
Well,
ranches.
nature and natural resources are two different things. Like Glacier National Park is just up, northeast of us, and you got Yellowstone. It's conserved. You know what I mean? It's conservation.
Yep.
But we have pretty unfettered. Well, I take that back. You have to buy a ticket, but it's largely unfettered access to that land. I don't think necessarily just because the land is going to be put under the conservation umbrella that it would be completely stripped away.
Well, the problem is that some of this land is being taken away from farmers and ranchers as well. That has been happening.
That's problematic.
Yeah.
People should actually I was just, again, having a conversation not too long ago about agriculture and tilling of soil and erosion and the things that, they're looking at different ways, and the demand, again, exploding population in the world. What does it actually take to, in the current means that we use in technology, to feed everybody?
Right.
Yeah, you could bump up against a problem real fast if you start taking ranchers and farmers' property.
Yeah, and it's not unlike that hasn't happened in history. That was one of the first things the Bolsheviks did. In fact, in Ukraine, of all places, 6 million Ukrainians starved to death when they took the food. Yes, the parallels might seem dramatic, but the reality is that taking food and taking natural resource is the fundamental thing that a tyrant has to do. Because money ultimately isn't the wealth. The wealth is the land. The wealth is the food, the water, and the energy that we produce. So ownership of that is ownership of everything else. So anyway, I worked with a lot of your legislators on this. The governors rejected Biden's 30 by 30 executive order. And that's the power of the 10th Amendment. And that's my whole thing. My whole project is to try to get state governments to reject the 2030 agenda at the state level. And then I'm done. That's all I set out to do. I just want as many states in the country to say 10th Amendment, we're saying, okay, Obama, Bush, you signed us in, we're out. You can stay in California, but Montana, South Dakota, we're out. Texas, Oklahoma, whatever. And that's all I'm saying out to do. Once we're out of that agenda, once we're out of that agreement, we don't have to follow all these carbon dioxide. We can make our own rules. If we want to do that, then we can do it locally. We can decide to do it ourselves, not at the behest of a supranational organization. And that's really my end goal. So I've worked a lot with Montana government, and that was really it was your legislators that actually got me into politics. It was their fault. They're to blame for all of this. Yeah, because I was actually just on. I was doing Facebook Lives, and
Well, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, and this was at the beginning of the lockdowns. My son was born on March 12th, 2020, by the way. So he was born the day the world locked down. So I was in the hospital, and Trump's on TV.
Is his first name Locke? Middle name down? Oh. That's a fucking missed opportunity.
Well,
there's some really cool things you could have done there.
John Locke, of course, was the philosopher that inspired the founding fathers too. The English Enlightenment philosopher about individual rights and all that. That was a missed opportunity. Yeah. So no, his name's Aaron. So anyway, all that aside, so I was doing Facebook Lives, and then a couple of your state government, one of the chairman of Yellowstone County, and an assistant to the executive assistant to Attorney General. They both saw that I was like drinking a glass of whiskey, smoking a cigarette, and like talking about how COVID was not as deadly as all the stuff we've talked about already right at the beginning. So then they reached out to me 6 months later and said, well, it turned out all these conspiracies you were talking about have happened. So can you tell us what's going to happen next? Because I said vaccine passports were going to come and all of that in March of 2020, and it happened a year later.
It happened some places.
Yeah, in most of the world, most of the Western world, we in a lot of America were shielded against that for sure. But, you know, I mean, in a place like Australia, you couldn't go 5 miles from your house in many cities there, many of the states. Like I knew guys there that if I can't even travel more than 5 miles from my house, you know, so it is extreme in other parts of
and
the
the
world.
only way that'll be rectified is in Australia. Australians will have to deal with that themselves.
For sure.
Or any other country or any other situation that is localized like that. Even it might be a global event, but the local reaction to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, to think that a policy can apply at a blanket perspective to the entire world is, again, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it just seems so ridiculously unreasonable to me.
Yeah. No, and you're right. And that's why the state focus is my focus. And so these...
It's one of the beauties of the United States, the latitude that we have. You know, some people may opt in, or some states, I should say, may opt in and some may opt out. And then, of course, people do have the right to travel freely throughout the United States, and they can geographically locate where they ideologically align.
Right. And honestly, that's all I've been fighting for. All I want to see is like, look, if California want to stay in and they want to turn their state as part of a satellite of the United Nations regulations and agreements and stuff, then that's what they want to do. But the thing is all of the states were signed in without consenting. Nobody asked us as states. Nobody asked people of South Dakota, do you want to be part of this total transformation of society? You know, so all I'm going around is saying, let's vote on this.
Did the presidents who signed on to those make those decisions in a vacuum? Or is it something that does it require congressional oversight, approval? Or is it something that they can decide just inside of their own personal cabinet and then sign on the dotted line?
Exactly that. They just decided that this is the right thing to do. We're the executive. We're going to sign on the dotted line. Now, they will say that it's a non-binding treaty, right? So they'll say, don't worry, it's a non-binding treaty. So therefore...
I want one of those for my car payment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is a non-binding lease.
Yeah. It's funny how like it's always non-binding when it feels like it's really binding. But no, so then what happens is it goes back to the beginning of the conversation where the local governments, they do the binding part, right? So the executive, Obama, signs Agenda 2030 and says, non-binding, this is just advisory. But the city of San Francisco or the city of Chicago, it's binding to them because they sign
because
into
they
law.
are choosing to make it based off the local government decisions.
Yeah, so then they sign it in, and you can literally Google this wherever you live in the country. You can Google your city, 2030, sustainable development. You can do, we have it in Missoula here. And that was the first thing I was targeting when I was speaking to your legislators. You type in Montana 2030 Sustainable Development. First thing that come up is Missoula. And it will.
Is that the only one in Montana?
It's the only one I found, yeah. So
There's not that many large population centers. So right now we're kind of up north. You got Whitefish and Kalispell combined, probably 50,000.
Right.
South is Missoula, Butte, mostly known for methamphetamines. I hear they're fantastic there. Yeah. And then kind of Bozeman and then Billings. It's like it's a little bit of an L that's laying on its back on the long axis. And so I think Missoula, Michael, could you look it up? Is Missoula like the number 2 city in Montana?
Population-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me see.
I'm just curious as to when the population density and these type of policies would come in.
Yeah, because Billings and Helena is normally where I come when I come out to Montana.
Okay.
Missoula. It's Billings, Missoula, Great Falls. But Missoula's second.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, there's normally where I come out. So Missoula 2030, that means that even though the non-binding treaty that Obama signed in Missoula, it's binding. It's government. It's local government law.
Well, then who cares if a president signs non-binding treaties if the local government can do whatever the hell they want to do? It almost seems irrelevant what the president does at that point.
Well, it was until these executive orders started getting signed by, say, like Biden, right? 30% of the land being taken away is massive. The ban on energy is massive. So these are all 2030 executive orders, which is why this is it. And then this is what I spoke to. I was at the GOP convention in 2021, and I spoke about this exact thing. And we went through this in detail. 100% clean energy that means no carbon dioxide will be allowed to be produced in Missoula by 2030. And that will be...
Does that mean we have to hold our breath?
Exactly, yeah.
Fuck.
How are they going to get rid of everybody? I probably shouldn't ask that. That's but yeah, so this is how it works. And this goes across. So the thing is that Biden's been an executive order. So you're getting hit from both sides. You're getting land and energy clamped down from federal.
So I mean, we're looking at this here. So let's say you're either a resident or somebody looking at going into business in Missoula. How does this actually impact you?
Well, if you produce any carbon dioxide, you won't be able to do business there unless you find another way of generating energy by 2030.
Who's regulating that? And who's coming to check that?
Well, that would be you'd have to, I guess, apply for a permit from the government, right? So to do business, and then they would say, well, what's the business? And so in Billings, they have a point system right now. And I went through this at the last talk I did with the legislators. So that you have to do these sustainability points, and you say, well, you get 7 points for doing solar energy, you get X amount of points for doing this, right? So this would be that, but on steroids, because it would be law here. You cannot produce carbon dioxide by 2030 here. You must have some clean energy system, or
is
you have
that
to
a
pay
law
penalties.
or is that a goal?
No, that's it. That's signed. That memorandum is signed in by 2030.
So that is law.
That's law. Yeah.
God damn you, Michael, for finding a website that has more information than I can read in a short period of time.
I know. That's the struggle I've been having all day.
A lot of them have it law, and most of America's major cities have signed it in. Like by 2030, this is what we're going to do. And that's the problem. It's like we said at the beginning, everything produces carbon dioxide. There are ways around it for sure. Yes, we can find alternative energy and stuff. But at the end of the day, the only people that are going to be able to do business are those that can afford to pay the carbon credits because they have a carbon credit scheme. So what that basically means is if you do produce carbon dioxide, it's like you can pay for the carbon credits. You can say, I overproduce carbon dioxide, so I'm going to pay the credits. The only people who are going to afford to do that, of course, are the global corporations, the major ones.
Is this apply to existing businesses as well or only new?
It'll apply to everybody.
So there's another way I could see that playing itself out, and that is individuals and organizations will flee these areas if they become prohibitive in their ability to live the life the way that they want to or conduct business the way that they want to. And Missoula will auger in to the point that people there will no longer agree with this because they're seeing the reality of it and what it actually looks like in execution, and they will vote in new leadership that will detach from this.
Well, that would be the hope, right? But the issue that we have is that the slush fund never ends for this side.
What side do you mean?
The side that promotes the 2030 Global Governance Project, right? They have all the money. That's why the ESG fund comes slushing through. People say Hollywood go woke, go broke. It can't go broke because they have access to the slush fund of all the money. That's so perfect example. Disney's like, I don't know, it's like $40 billion in debt or something, but they get the zero interest money coming through this ESG system because they're so woke. So they just get the constant flow of money no matter how much psychological damage they do to the population, no matter how much they try to destroy our children's minds nowadays. They will always get money because they're on board this project.
They might always get money, but nobody's paying attention. So, go woke, go broke has a different meaning as well. You could go broke in your ability to capture and maintain people's attention. Almost no movies are built or made in Hollywood anymore. It's mostly like Vancouver, Atlanta.
And they're going to Georgia,
yeah. Yellowstone people is finally actually made in Montana. A lot of people didn't know the first few seasons. Park City was like the backdrop for Bozeman. Sneaky fuckers. Tax credits.
Nobody told me. I was deceived.
Because nobody really gives a shit. Like,
Yeah.
who gives a fuck about a TV show?
Yeah.
But yeah, cool. They have enough money to operate. Their influence is diminishing rapidly. So cool. You can keep your doors open. If nobody's walking through them, who gives a fuck?
Right.
People get to vote with their participation and their attention. So yeah, they may never have to throw bankrupt on there, and they could make whatever type of media they want to, short form, long form, whatever it is, however it might get to you. But if people don't consume it, that's a wasted investment on the people at the top throwing the levers on the system that you're talking about.
Sure. Well, and that's why, voices like yours, voices like all the people that I've spoken to in the last couple of years are so important to offer that alternative. Because if all people are seeing is that, again, it goes back to leadership and strength and incentives, and people follow that.
Well, I have to declare that this podcast is brought to you by BlackRock. They reached out to me when they knew you were coming on. So Michael and I just
just to trap me. It's
We have a
entrapment.
we just got a 0% interest loan. He just bought an apartment complex.
Yeah.
Zero. It's solar.
Make hay while the sun shines. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
My bank account's looking
Yeah.
pretty good.
I wish-
We can continue. I was required to say that at one time during the
it makes-
episode.
I was hoping that they would have paid me off to stop doing it by now. I was like, they haven't reached out yet, so that means either I'm just not being effective enough.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for a buyout at some point. But that is because again, people follow incentives, people follow leadership, and if all the leadership, if everyone, Tom Hanks or Biden or this person or that person, if everyone is espousing this new religion, then 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, they are going to follow it because that's what the leadership is showing them.
They follow it until they realize it doesn't work.
One would hope.
History, I think, has shown us repetitively over time that these systems will eventually fall apart.
I agree.
You know, I remember myself when I was 20, I would describe myself as an idiot. I was very convicted in my beliefs, and I didn't have a great understanding of why I had them. And then life kicks you right in the fucking teeth. Mm-hmm. And I think you get a better understanding. And you develop over time, and this is by no means trying to demean anybody who is, in their earlier phases of life. But the reality is you have less laps around the sun, right? So therefore you have less exposure and experience. You develop a better bullshit detector the more experience that you have. Mm-hmm. The Bidens and the Tom Hanks, to use the examples that you used, they might seem like, influential leaders, and you might get people to move in that direction. But I think people are smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. The mob is stupid, or young people are stupid. Maybe they do stupid things sometimes, but I think people are smarter than they're often given credit for. You'll bump up against the objective reality eventually. Mm-hmm. And then the pendulum starts swinging in the other direction. And, stepping out of or maybe, I don't know, maybe it does tie into what we're talking about, the globalist approach, but woke ideology, to tie it kind of back into Disney.
Yep.
I'm fucking super confused about a lot of the social issues that are going on right now. And I try to be empathetic to everybody. Like, I just want people to be happy and live a great life. I don't know how many pronouns they're supposed to be. I know my personal belief on this, right?
Sure.
But the pendulum is swinging in a direction. And, I'm starting to read, articles now, like people who lead with pronouns on their resumes are being hired at a lower rate than those that don't. Because the pendulum at some point reaches its apex and people go, hold on a second. Now, it might take them too long, much like COVID, right? Lockdown. And finally people are like, hold on, I got something under the table for you. They pull the Montana under the table. But it does happen. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't understand, or maybe I have my understanding of the globalist approach. I feel at the end, it's guaranteed to fail.
I think you're right long term. Yeah, I do. So then the system that they are trying to put in place would be ravenously torn down. That's also a big concern, though. The big concern I have is not so much that they are going to be successful forever with this totalitarian system. My concern is that they're going to destroy everything I care about in the process of building it. That's my primary concern. Do you
think that may need to be required to recenter people, to get them to pay attention more, to make sure that things like that don't happen again in the future?
No, I don't. I mean, I would have hoped the last 3 years would be enough. Right? That should be enough of a shock, right? That should be enough. And by the way, that's also a concern with psychology, with understanding trauma, that the reason that so many, it's not like a pejorative. I'm not saying that, people follow leadership. We all follow leadership.
Sure.
When I take my car to the mechanic, I'm following the leadership. Because I don't know how to fix my car. He does.
We all have things in our life or people in our life that we are drawn to for whatever reason.
Yes. And we all need leadership in something, whatever that something is. So my concern, though, is that when trauma is created, you create a susceptibility and malleability to the brain. So this is what happened in March of 2020. And it's happened in other times in history, too. Now, it doesn't have to be forced. You can just capitalize on a trauma. Whatever the trauma is, JFK being shot is a massive trauma. Princess Diana dying is a massive trauma.
Hold on. We just touched on a conspiracy theory we didn't talk about.
Yeah, I don't know anything about
JFK,
it.
lone gunman or no?
I actually have I genuinely don't really know anything about the JFK thing. I know
Michael?
it sounds awful, but I don't.
All right, so that same guy I mentioned, so he has a video on it, and I don't remember the specifics, but he goes over why there was probably more than one gunman, and why
gotta be.
it was
Got to be.
probably the CIA.
Yes, got to be. And
Same with MLK.
And his nephew said so, right? Robert Kennedy, right? He said so, and he's been a champion of health freedom and stuff for many years. You
were talking about the malleability. Sorry to disrupt you, but I was like, holy shit, we just touched on a major one we hadn't talked about yet.
I don't know enough about JFK to talk about it.
Yeah. Neither do I.
And
it doesn't prevent me from having a goddamn opinion on it.
Well, you know, I get afraid because like I have all these people that are just like looking for me to fail and say the wrong thing at any possible moment. They're going to come out and send because I had to go to the state capitol. I'll come back to malleability in a second, but I had to go to the state capitol to do a testimony on ESG, South Dakota State Capitol back in January. And they come out with lawyers and banks saying how anti-American it is to try to interfere with the free market and all these things. And I'm like, we're not interfering with the free market. This is a government-signed treaty that you're working in alignment with. That isn't the free market. It's not like you guys are just coming out saying, hey, we care about sustainability. No, you're working in tandem with the government. That's called fascism, when the corporate and the government merge. So I had to go down and do this working with. So the lawyers and the banks are looking for any weakness that they can find in my argument.
It's a beautiful thing to say that you don't know.
There's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I don't know.
It's amazing to me how many people are unwilling to arrive at that station. They'll repeat things that they've heard, absent understanding. They will parrot things, and it goes back to the messaging around COVID.
Yeah.
I think our country, the world in general, actually probably would have been much better off if leaders were willing to say, I don't know, but we think right now this is the best approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a balance we need to strike between like conviction and humility, right? We want to have conviction for what we believe in. Mm-hmm. It's essential. It's the life force, as Nietzsche would say. It's our vitality. It's our very life force. Like this is who we are. This is what we believe in. This is what we fight for. But at the same time, we have to have humility to know that we have to evolve. We have to adapt. And you know, I'm a man of faith, but it's actually one of the struggles I have with people of faith is the rigidity. You know, and I'm someone who takes my faith really seriously. But I also am kind of like we have to be able to evolve and grow, because it's not that the faith's changing, it's just that we can't see it clearly all the time. So what's going to happen is over time we're going to be able to see things more clearly. Yeah. Right? So it's more like, so God's eternal thing, which is the truth, is always there, but what happens is over time it becomes clearer to us. It's not that it's changed, it's just we're changing, and suddenly now I can see it at 80% clarity as opposed to 50% clarity. And that's where the evolution and adaptation is essential, because if we're too rigid, we don't actually know if what we're seeing is the truth. And we have to be able to look around, right? And say the contrary argument.
I would add one thing to that, and I think it's incredibly critical for people to spend a few moments thinking on this. Depth of belief and validity of belief are not intrinsically tied.
Go on.
There are people out there whose meaning in life is to prove that the earth is flat. They believe it at a granular level in their soul. Do you know how I know this? Because a few have reached out to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had a few too.
So the depth of that belief, I'm not going to question that. The validity of the belief is in no way tied to the depth of the belief. Mm-hmm. It's a trap, a circular trap that I think everybody, and again, I'm speaking very deeply about myself in the way that I've changed my thinking on things over life. I constantly remind myself, just because I believe so deeply doesn't necessarily mean that my belief is valid. It could be based off of my experiences, and my experiences could be wildly different than somebody else. It's just another important aspect that I think would benefit people who, and I hope people find purpose and passion in life and dive headlong into it, but keep that in the back of your mind. Yeah. 1% people, just keep 1% in the back of your mind. Yeah. You might be wrong.
It's so essential. And you know, I've had to rewire my brain on this, because I went from being like anti-religious to being really religious.
What was the shift?
One extreme to the other. So now I'm kind of like, I feel a bit more centered right now.
How'd you go from one to the other?
I have obsessive compulsive disorder, right? I have it managed now, but there have been times where it's so extreme that I can't stop thinking about one thing for months and months at a time. Just one thing. Like, it could be a bad dream, could be a bad thought, could be a bad moment in life. And I'll obsess over it to the point where I can't think about or do anything else other than that one thing that keeps coming back up. And that's why it's a serious neurological disorder, because you can't control the fact that and the more you resist it, the more it comes back. So, in that moment of weakness, I decided I got to humble myself, and I've got to go higher, right? Because I keep looking at myself for all the answers for things. And in that moment, I turned to God, and I found reprieve in that, not just because I was not looking at myself anymore, but because I realized that truly, to be free, we have to learn to let go of looking at ourselves for everything all the time, right? Like, you can't make yourself the moment you make yourself the center of your world is the moment that you become a prisoner to everything, So, and I think Jesus teaches us that faith is really about like letting go. It's largely what forgiveness is for, is to let go. Enact justice. He said, I came to bring a sword, but we have to also forgive and let go, right? We shouldn't be holding on to resent. So do justice, but let go as well.
So it's like a little bit of revenge, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit more Old Testament stuff.
Yeah. Well, he said some definitely more masculine edged things than I ever heard at church. Jesus says in Luke 10:19, we must trample on the serpents and scorpions and over the power of the enemy. We must trample on the power of the enemy. This is Jesus himself saying this. So, but we don't hear a lot of those things. I was dealing with this internal struggle and turned to faith, and that helped a lot. And I always believed in God, by the way. It wasn't like in a moment of struggle I just suddenly converted. I always believed in God, but I started to take it seriously. Mm-hmm. But then what happened is I started to take it so seriously internally, I became OCD about the faith, right? So then, you exchange one thing for another. So now I'm starting to second guess everything, and I'm starting to think, oh man, I'm like wearing like stones. Is this like satanic, right? And you start to like get into this like life denial. You start to deny vitality of life.
Do you own a collection of crystals?
I don't, but I have.
So you're not fully off the res yet. I got a buddy, Greg Anderson. If you hear this, you suck. Son of a bitch. He bought me one. I'm like, you motherfucker.
What's wrong with the crystal?
I'm not sure there's anything wrong with the crystals other than perhaps the belief that the crystal in some way, shape, or form is going to like determine the course of your life.
No, I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. But, I think it's useful, like it's just like any tool, if it helps you, because I think the reason that I like the stones is just I like things from nature. That's all. Like and I like having like rocks. I collect rocks from mountains I go to in different parts of the country, and I just like having them on my desk, just like a piece of nature there, a piece of something that God actually created and not me. So really, then it just came to understanding like I'm second guessing everything, and then to the point where I'm starting to deny life itself. Like I'm starting to not live with conviction because I'm living back in my head again. So I just came to this understanding that be certain but not too certain. The same thing you said.
Yeah.
Have a lot of certainty but don't have total certainty.
It worries me when I encounter people. It's a really good way to avoid contentious conversations with people. Instead of diving headlong into the disagreement, opening with, is there any evidence or argument or conversation that we could have that would in any way, shape, or form change your mind about what you believe? Fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. And if they say no, don't have the argument, because that's just this, right? And the people who are not 99% convicted and 1% they have it in the back of their mind, they're 100% convicted. Those are the people that I actually worry about. Mm-hmm. Again, my ideas on things, who I am as a person, has changed so much throughout the 45 years of my life that I'm sure there have been issues that I was 99% convicted on and 1%, and it has shifted over time, or it has softened, or how I feel about people or situations or things. As long as that little kernel of doubt is in there, I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's when you get rid of that, have a pencil-thin mustache and you're standing in front of an army like, let's take over the world. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
right.
fuck.
Yeah, you know, it's so true, but it's so necessary to do philosophy well, right? Because to truly find truth, you have to realize that you don't have the whole truth. Otherwise, how can you find it? How can you discover truth if you think you have it all? So
Is it even possible to discover the absolute truth as a human being, as imperfect as we are?
I don't think it is. No,
I don't think it is either.
I don't think it is. I think that we can certainly get closer, right? I think it's like a gradient, not a line. It's a spectrum, like gender. So we go from, not really. So we go from like a gradient. We're really far away, and we get closer.
They're going to pull that little section too. And
They're
they're like,
gonna-
here he is.
Yeah, yeah. They're going to say, see, I always knew he was a social communist underneath.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I literally
Yeah.
thought, I'm like, that's creative editing right there.
Yeah, they're going to pull a lot. They're going to say, look, he has OCD. He admitted he's nuts. Never listen to him again. That's all right. Well, whatever floats your boat.
There are some amazing people who have OCD who have accomplished things that I just scratch my head at and would never be able to do so. You know,
Because you have to be a bit insane to do the things that we do, you know, looking at details over and over again. Just like,
do you think it's even possible to make it through life not being a little bit insane? Like, of course,
Good question.
Of course, I'm the most normal person that I've ever met. I don't have a single problem. This is what everybody tells me, and it's also what I tell myself. It's my daily.
Yeah, I get that vibe for sure. Yeah.
No, it's like, how could you not be a little bit crazy just on this hurling marble through space? I mean, come on.
It's hard to wrap your head around. Yeah. Well, and it's also because we're fighting always against the currents of things that are happening. You know, so we're always trying to find like who we are, how to be good in society. And you have to, you know, you have children, you have a wife, you have community, and you're trying to balance all these things, and it's extremely tough. You know, but from my perspective, as it relates to the way that I try to approach things like truth, I try to make sure that my beliefs are aligned with the reality that we inhabit.
Yeah.
So in other words, the way that I keep myself in check would be, does my belief contradict what I'm seeing? You know, and if it doesn't, then those are aligned. One simple example would be if my belief started to tell me that, you know, slavery is okay, and that obviously contradicts the reality that I see, then obviously I know that that belief must be wrong.
And that would smack you right in the head.
Yeah, right. So, and I think that that's the key thing. We have to, like, you know, the way I look at philosophy, ideology bends reality to fit a narrative. Philosophy bends the narrative to fit reality. And that's the difference. So we're bending what we believe to align with reality versus trying to bend reality to align with what we believe. And it sounds simple, but it's a profound difference. And the ideological stuff we see today is them bending reality to fit the narrative. And that's the problem.
Yeah, it's not possible. I do a good amount of public speaking, and I talk about planning. You know, how do you plan for a combat operation? And one of the things you have to do is you have to develop a malleable plan to react to the real world. Because if you try to force the real world into your plan, it's a guaranteed failure, which is another way to kind of talk about what you're describing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that that's kind of fascinating to me, because as someone who, you know, you plan to try to overcome, you know, disaster, right? And
We'll spend 3 days planning for something that takes 90 minutes.
yeah,
And of the hundreds of combat operations I was involved with, take a guess at how many went as planned. It's a literal and figurative round number.
so I take it none went as
Fucking
planned.
goose egg. Why? Because the real world doesn't give a shit.
Right.
The real world doesn't really care what you believe. I think it rewards those that can navigate through the obstacles that are presented to them. And that's when, mission planning, what we're trying to do is think through contingencies before they actually happen. That's kind of the key to special operations mission planning and maybe larger military mission planning in general, although I don't have experience in that. If you can think through things before they become a crisis, when you get into a crisis situation, you're better prepared. But one of the number one ways to fail on the battlefield is to be presented with an objective reality and ignore it because you want your plan to succeed. So you could raise your hand and say, that was my idea, guys. Never mind the fact it got 6 people killed and 2 helicopters shot down. That was my idea.
I wanted to ask you, I was thinking about this when I was in the shower. I don't often think about you when I'm in the shower, but this
I
this
hope
one
not,
time-
because that's
this one time I did this morning.
pretty gay.
It is pretty gay, yeah. But I wasn't, if it makes you feel better, I was only touching the upper body part at the time that I was thinking about you.
Yeah, but I don't know what turns you on. You know what I mean? People are into some kinky shit. Did
Well,
you have clamps on your
I'm
nipples?
starting to get uncomfortable with this conversation.
Okay.
So as I was washing my armpits in the shower and I was thinking about you, I wanted to ask you this question, and it's related to a lot of what we've been talking about today, because governments and certain types of business people, a lot of the public will reach out to me about how to discuss the strategy of, what technocracy and those that don't like American freedom are doing. But you have an understanding of on-the-ground strategy that I obviously don't have. And I wanted to ask you this question because I'm curious to see your perspective on how things have transpired over the last few years. Does it seem to you like someone has put an idea into the population to split them, to, put seeds of doubt within the American system? Do you see, because if you think about, say we wanted to take down North Korean dictator.
Yeah.
We would want to send in propaganda that divided the population and got them to hate North Korea, and also got them to hate the population that love North Korea.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, I'd be curious to know, how do you see that happening? Do you think that's happened, or do you think it's organic, or do you think there are elements of that going on?
So when it comes to warfare, there's 3 levels of warfare: strategic, operational, and tactical. Mm-hmm. Strategic is like air that I've never been in the room to breathe. Conversations, and I quite frankly would have killed to be a fly on the wall, because I'm fascinated by people making decisions about policy and the movement and the execution of our state policy in a room, the small rooms that I assume that they occur in, made by people that aren't actually going to do it themselves. I'm just so fascinated to hear how those conversations go. Never was there. Operational. Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. I don't know what they call Syria or what they have called Iraq now. More centralized, right? It's like a kinetic theater of war. Mm-hmm. I have experience operating inside of that. No experience planning or executing the overall larger umbrella strategy. Tactical level. Mm-hmm. There's battalions and platoons. So we're talking, probably multi-hundreds to teens of people. My experience is at the absolute lowest level of that. I would say at a time, I've been out of the military for almost 10 years, so I'm as dated as can possibly be about the current tactics on the battlefield. There was a time where I understood them very well. Mm-hmm. And my ability to maneuver as an individual, on a battlefield through an urban environment or a rural environment, I was competent. I can definitely answer your question, but I want to make sure that you and people understand, just because I did what I did does not make me an expert on the overall grander scheme of warfare. I can only really talk about, I was an expert at find, fix, finish. Find an individual, fix them in place, finish. Mm-hmm. And that meant capture, kill. And that depended on how they behaved. A lot of people he's out there murdering people. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And then it's called the 3 FEA process, but find, fix, finish, exploit, and analyze. So you do an intel gathering, you analyze, and you continue on. The EA, a lot of that happens with our supporting assets because we hand over the intelligence and people who are way better at that stuff. So to get to your question, but again, I lay that foundation because one of the things I always try to be very cautious with is painting myself as somebody that I am not, with experience that I don't have. Mm-hmm. Because the question that you asked, it floats to me in the operational or strategic level, right? Because you're looking at another nation state and how they would want to facilitate and manipulate a potential adversarial nation state. So that's a level of decision making I don't have experience with. Fair. But I do have experience living in this country at a time where in the 45 years that I have been around, I don't think I've ever seen it as divided. And the best time to make moves when people, or I rephrase that, the best time to make moves is when people aren't paying attention. And one of the best ways to get them to not pay attention is to turn everybody around them into one of their enemies or adversaries. Mm-hmm. I don't know, though. this is what I bump up against, and I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know if it's a nation state or if it's the result that our two-party system is no longer serving the citizens in the manner that it was designed to. I think there are some huge problems in our current political system. One of the biggest ones, in my opinion, is that there are no term limits. And you have people who have made an occupation out of being in government service, or that maybe that's what they defined it as, or public service, right? Actually serving the people that voted them into office. For some people, it's a very tenuous line to try to connect those dots and how that's still actually happening. But I also think about if you've been in the system for 40 years or decades, and you look at, net worth of individuals before government service, net worth of individuals after government service, interesting trend given that their salaries are published. Some of these people are the best stock pickers known to fucking man. It's amazing.
Right. They're very fortunate, very lucky.
Incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
Like mathematically unheard of lucky. Again,
Yeah.
conversation for another time. But
Probably lucky, yeah.
do we even need the introduction of another nation state into the current ecosystem of our country when the system itself is now about serving itself as opposed to the people? And I don't know the answer to that, but the number of people who are literal neighbors that consider the person to their left or right their enemy because of a fucking sign in their yard is baffling to me.
Sure.
Because if the shit hits the fan, those are fellow Americans. Those are your neighbors. It's okay that they don't believe the same thing that you do, but it has gotten to this point where now your neighbor is your adversary. And is it the system doing that because then the system can reward itself in any way, shape, or form that they want to, and it's now designed to keep people you shouldn't be able to be in politics longer than you've been out of politics. I largely don't care where people land, left or right. If anybody wants to sit here and tell me that Joe Biden is functioning at the high end of the cognitive chart, I'm going to call you a fucking liar to your face. I'm going to say, can you please lay out for me objectively the data points that you are using for this? And I say that, and I absolutely love it when he gets up there and the teleprompter starts glitching, because that's some of the most amazing shit that I've ever seen on social media. Yeah. There's the other side of that. I'm just like, what are we looking like to the rest of the free world or the people who have access to that information? Sure. But if you can be in that system for longer than you've been out of it, and you can see the benefit that that individual has reaped. And again, this is just from a net worth perspective, but you could look at it also from an influence perspective. It almost as if there are enough problems where the divisiveness, maybe they are just occurring because of the state of our current system. Do I think it's plausible that a nation state would try to divide us like that? Absolutely. And again, not coming from a strategic or operational planner, I think that's what I would look at as well. But maybe we're at a place in the evolution of this country where the system, we need to take a really hard look at how, not necessarily tearing the system down, but I mean, can somebody really articulate for me and argue against term limits?
Sure.
What's the negative there? Oh, they won't be able to enrich themselves and they'll have to go back. Oh, that's a fucking positive. That's what I want. I want somebody who's elected into office, serving the people that elected them into office, not for their personal gain.
Well, they used to, right? I mean, like Washington himself, is a farmer as well, right? George Washington, right? So,
well, in those days, it was never designed to be your occupation,
right,
for the vast majority of your life.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
and maybe we need to return to that. And by that, I mean maybe we need to put into it, hey, your desire to serve is fantastic, but you are limited in your time to do so, and then you have to go back and go on and do something else.
Yeah.
Do I think that would change everything? I don't know, but I do think it would help. Yeah. And I think it would make us less susceptible to nation states that would want to try to divide us. Yep.
To division.
Oh, dear God.
So I found this.
Oh, fuck.
It's called Capital Trades.
Okay.
And it tracks trades of every politician in the capital. And there are 19 pages of this.
Wow. That is insane.
Is that volume number the dollar figures that they're trading in?
No, I believe that's individual stock volume.
Oh gosh.
Because I was going to say, holy shit, there's some
No,
really
no,
big
I
numbers.
think it is. I believe it is.
Well,
That
then
could
the
be even more, couldn't it?
second from the left is very, very rich.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Should politicians be able to trade stock while they're in office?
No, I would agree. I don't think they should be. No, they
I
shouldn't
totally
be doing
agree
any-
with you.
they
You
shouldn't
should
doing any
not be able to
business.
and
No.
again, that would, you know what that'd be an incentive to do? Get the fuck out of office.
Yes, and just go back into business if that's what you want to do. Yeah, no, I think the reason I was curious about the strategic thing is because when I look at it, if I were to want to change a society, I would approach it the exact same way. I would say I'd make them hate the country, I'd make them hate each other, and then I would make them do things that are going to literally destroy themselves, like hate having children, like hate getting married.
Well, here's the thing. Imagine how
So-
much time you would save as a nation state if you were thinking about it like that, but then you sit back and you realize, oh, they're already there on their own.
Well, and I think it is a comment. I don't, going back to before, I think there's a lot of, this is organic in a sense. A lot of this is just happenstance from what we would call civilizational cycles, right? We are at that 250 years of an empire, so a lot of that is.
It is super cliche to say, and Michael, correct me on the quote on this, but what is hard times create hard men.
Yep.
Hard men create soft times.
Mm-hmm.
Soft times create soft men. And women, obviously. But then that cycle repeats itself.
Yep. And then hard times create strong men, right? And it goes back around.
And it goes right back around. Yeah, the soft time, soft time or soft men create hard times, and then this cycle, it's a serpent that's eating its tail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that where we are in the cycle? I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I think, again, I go back to my belief. I believe that people at the end of the day are good. I believe that we will navigate our way out of it, but I don't think it's going to be clean by any stretch of the imagination. It might be a lot more Texas Chainsaw Massacre than people in white lab coats with scalpels. But maybe that's required.
I would I will legit prefer the Mad Max scenario to the Brave New World 1984 scenario. I'll take the Mad Max any day over the alternative of what they actually want, which is more of a 1984 scenario.
How come it's so hard to define who they is? Why can't anybody determine who's pulling the levers and who would benefit the most from this?
Well, I mean, we can in a sense, right? We know that it's all the stakeholders of the 2030 agenda and of the Great Reset. So, that's the shareholders and CEO of places like BlackRock and Vanguard, and as well as the corporate stakeholders of the World Economic Forum, like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates, and then of course the primary stakeholders of the United Nations and those that signed on to that. So really, you're looking at more of foundations, as in like foundations, organizations, as opposed to people specifically. For example, the Rockefeller Foundation is at the heart of the social engineering of American society. And it's not really David Rockefeller specifically, because he died, but the Rockefeller Foundation is carrying on the work. So really, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at foundations. We're looking at organizations that have a transcendent mission, in their own words. George Soros is a great example. In his own words, George Soros said, he has the Open Society Foundation, the idea of open border, making one world, no nations. And he said in his own memoir, I fancied myself as some kind of god, in his own words, George Soros. So the point is that this is the view they have. David Rockefeller said in his own memoir, on his page 405 or 406 of his 2003 memoir, and he said, people have characterized me as an internationalist conspiring to create a one world order. If that's so, then I am guilty.
What was his level of net worth?
David Rockefeller?
Yeah.
I don't actually know. Definitely in the billions, of course, because he was like chairman of Chase.
I ask because at some level of net worth, people get off the fucking rails about reality.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And
You lose sight of objective reality in the world that everybody else lives in.
1.4 billion
In what year was that?
in 1937.
So that's like fucking trillionaire.
Yeah. Today, that would be,
Yeah.
I think that's about 100 times, it'd be 100 times more today.
Extremely wealthy.
But the thing is in the people like Rockefeller, just as the same as the Windsors, the so-called royal family of England, it's the same thing. Their wealth is in assets, not real money. So it's like Elon Musk has more money than Charles Windsor, right? King Charles. But yet he owns real wealth, assets, property, land, entire systems. And Rockefeller's the same. banks, chairman of banks, chairman of organizations. He is one of the founders of the United Nations post-World War II. And this is all on record. Mm-hmm. And if you look at his biography, he'll say advisor to US presidents. Advisor to US presidents. And this applies very much to people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. So these are the who. These are the people, the architects that decided we want to eradicate borders and division and discrimination. We are able to control the destiny of humanity. They believed that. And they were in their own words. David Rockefeller said this in his own words. I am guilty of wanting to create a one world system. And that's what I'm going to do. And the reason being, and he goes on to justify this in the following page, which again, you can find 405, 406 in his memoir. And he says, because look at what globalism has done. We've taken down the Soviet Union. You know, the justification is, hey, we're taking down all these tyrannical regimes by making everything one system. But of course, well, you're also taking down the American system then in that process as well. So is that really worth the trade-off? Is it worth, hey, we're going to sacrifice our sovereignty and our way of life to merge with everyone else because Stalin is out the way? And no, you know, that isn't worth the sacrifice, but that's what they want. So these are the architects. They are typically advisors to US presidents. Those are national security advisors, Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski. These are people that have mapped this stuff out decades ahead of time. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote books about how they were going to use, this is the game theory, political game theory, right? Where they were going to use Afghanistan. And he wrote about this in late 70s, early 80s. I think it was Jimmy Carter's time, I guess, just before Reagan comes in. We're going to use Afghanistan to drain the Soviets of their resources, right? We're going to use Afghanistan to drain the Soviets. And then we'll take down Afghanistan later. But the idea here is...
It didn't work out so well, but...
yeah. But actually, they successfully managed to get the Soviets to burn a lot of their resources, right? Trying to take down Afghanistan. With America just being like...
As almost every country and invader has, except for Genghis Khan in that region.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right, isn't it? It's, even the British Empire failed in Afghanistan.
Fuck them right up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the point is that ultimately it comes down to a matter of they have a transcendent goal, and their transcendent goal ultimately isn't really, I mean, judging again, just going by their own words and what they say, it's ultimately they want to change the shape of human nature. They don't like how we operate as human beings. They don't want nations and division and sovereignty and all this stuff. They want a clean one world operating system, you know.
How do we know that they're wrong in their beliefs?
Because natural law determines this. God's design, and doesn't, if you don't believe in God, that's fine. Just look at it as natural law. That determines what is true, not you, not me, right? So what we do is we take an insight into that. And that's where it goes back to what we were saying before about not being too certain. Because the only way you can do that is truly observe the world and the natural order and not just stay in your own head. So I think we have to observe it and say, let's look at the places where people who have different value systems are thrown together and let's see if they're peaceful.
No.
Never peaceful. Never peaceful.
I think if you get more than like 3 human beings together, there's a fist fight coming.
So I'll give you a perfect example, right? I moved over from the United Kingdom. My wife's from Minnesota, for those that don't know who are listening. My 3 children were born here as well. And I moved over, and I had a friend who moved from the same city as me. I moved to America, and I always loved America because I identified with the Englishman who left England to come to America, who hated the monarchy from the beginning. Thomas Paine was born 100 miles from me, and he was the one who wrote the beginnings of the Declaration of Independence. Born in Norfolk, came over, slandered the king, started a revolution. I was
How dare he?
That guy is my hero. I wanted to go do the same thing. So I came over with a friend from Birmingham, England, but total opposites. He doesn't like guns, doesn't believe in basically any of the constitutional rights as supreme, the supreme law of land, and I do. So you have 2 dudes come from the same place, move to the same place.
Yeah.
One wants to be here and should be here. One, I was like, you shouldn't be here. Like, you don't actually like it. Like, you should just piss off, go back, you know?
It's one of the beauties of this country, though. The right to not believe.
Well, that's okay as long as...
It's a double-edged sword, but that's the thing is, the system is designed for those people too.
As long as you're not trying to upend the system, I agree. Like if because the problem is...
You have the right all the way up to physically trying to upend it. But the diversity of the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, like It's a beautiful thing. I've been to some places where
Sure.
that shit doesn't exist, and let me tell you, the treatment that I have seen of human beings towards other human beings, it exceeds my vocabulary. It's fucking horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little bit of an appreciation for the fact that he wants it all to kind of piss off, but he's allowed to say that.
I agree. And sometimes that, I may come across as a bit harsh. That's just, it's because I suppose that because I'm always trying to not get assassinated by BlackRock or something like that. So it eventually gets tiring and you start to lose patience.
Do they have a kinetic action arm that I'm not aware of?
They might do. I have no idea.
Do you get Christmas cards from them?
I have, I do check under my car regularly just to be sure. And my family is Irish, so you just get used to doing that anyway. You know what
Jesus,
I mean?
man.
My dad's from Belfast, so you get used to just checking under the car.
Yeah.
Just as a given. So the point that I'm making though is that, the reason I know that what I would call as our opposition are wrong is based just on observation of natural law and based on the observation of human beings and behavior. We know that we have different customs. We know that we can't make Saudi Arabia America and we can't make Russia England, and we just can't do these things. We don't have the power to, because these things evolve on their own over time. So national sovereignty and the creation of our own system is how things work. It's how nature works. And the competing systems that we have, that's always been in existence. But the real problem is the fact that absolute power corrupts absolutely, as Lord Acton said.
I think just power in general does. And I think you can look at our current political system and see that.
Yeah. And, the concern that I would have is that we have, if we start giving global governance power, and it already exists, it's just at 30% capacity and not 100% capacity, but it already exists. It's already there. These organizations already have immense amounts of power. So the problem is who becomes the stakeholder of our rights? Where do our rights end? Where does the power? And COVID has proved that. The climate stuff has proved that. Lots of things have proved that. So the migration compact has proved it. All these things. So my concern ultimately is what I believe we are standing for is in alignment with nature, with natural law, and with the design.
Do you think that natural law in regards to humans would ever let the 2030 plan completely execute itself? Or would natural law bounce up against it at some point? Humanity would take over and they would strike it down? Because that's kind of where I land.
Yeah. I think eventually, yes, eventually it would be taken down one way or another. My concern is if we leave that too late, and the COVID thing kind of showed this too, and that was just 2 years. But
Ooh, hold on. Another one.
Go on.
Lab leak theory.
Yeah. That's one. I actually...
Where did COVID come from? Fuck, we're covering all of the conspiracies.
I tell
today.
you what, I have a more controversial view than even the lab leak theory. COVID was rebadged flu.
Tell me more.
That's what I believe. I don't believe there was a COVID-19 at all.
Really?
Well, I'm open to it. I don't really know. It doesn't really ultimately matter, but I do lean in that direction, and I'll tell you why.
So man-made, though?
Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know.
You think nature rebatched it?
I think it was rebadged flu, and here's the reason why. Because in 2020, apart from a couple of cities in the world, there was no increase in deaths. So for the majority of the world, in the height of the so-called engineered bioweapon, there was no increase in deaths for the vast majority of countries, right? From 2020 to 2019, 2018. None. You can go and compare the death rate data in 2020. You will find no significant increase in most places.
How about 21 and 22?
Oh, in 2021, you see a significant increase in deaths, and in 2022, you do too. But there were other variables that I probably can't talk about on this show that were introduced in 2021.
Why can't you talk about it on the show?
Well, you're on YouTube, aren't you?
Yeah, but who gives a shit?
Okay. Well, there was another variable introduced in 2021 that spiked the death rate, and that was an mRNA injection.
The vaccine itself.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So when
What's that have to do with YouTube?
Oh, because this is YouTube will ban this kind of
It will get
discussion.
demonetized.
Yeah.
You'll get fucking demonetized, Michael.
It'll get so I try not to tank people's shows when we because this
No,
is
talk about it however you want to. Again, I'm fascinated by that because
so that was when you see a spike though. You see a significant increase in deaths in 2021 and 2022, which you do not see in 2020 overall. Now in 2020 in places like New York City, very small places on the global map, you do see you see increases in death, but overall, not at all. 2021, massive increases. 2022, massive increases.
Do you feel that the powers that be were, in fact, trying to reduce the world's population with the mRNA vaccine?
Well, I think it's a rational conclusion to come to.
Hold on, let me get it situated here. So this is deaths per year, or just a graph of deaths.
So 2020, there's a spike. Around Feb of 21, it looks like there's another spike. That's okay. The colors are different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Can you look at it from like 2017 to 2021? Oh, actually, no, 2021.
The farthest back I can go is January 8th, 2020. Let's see if I can find another one.
So we can compare the differences.
Yeah, I would like to take a few year runway at it to get a look at it.
Because the problem is that a lot of the data for 2021 and 2022 hasn't even been released. We've only just started to see the excess mortality from 2021 and 2022 in the last few months. And that excess mortality was at least 1.1 million from what I saw in 2021. And that means an extra 1.1 million people
over
dying.
the normal,
Yes,
just people
over
dying
the normal death rate.
Yeah.
And that I only
Which is
saw...
what, about 55,000 people a day globally-ish?
I'm not sure.
I think it is.
But the data has not even been released for most of 2020, 2021, 2022, because I was checking in on it regularly last year. But we also, if we look at the European medical data and we look at the United Kingdom data, specifically in 2021 and in 2022, we see massive spikes of deaths. Nothing like significant. It's not like a constant trajectory. It's more just like spikes. We see 700% increases. I think that was week 22 and week 23 of 2022. We saw a 700% increase in deaths in Europe of children, I believe, aged 5 to 12. Now, that's not all the time, but we're just seeing these little spikes, which we've not seen in many, many years. Right? And there's only really one major variable. I mean, if it was to do with the pandemic, then I don't know why we weren't seeing millennial-aged people dying. The only deaths we were seeing significantly in 2020 were comorbidities of people 81 on average.
Do you think that the mRNA vaccine was designed to do that? Or do you think it was rushed and people were doing the best that they could?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it actually matters in the end of which of those two that it is. I believe that there was definitely an intent based on what I said at the beginning. We had treatments for COVID-19. So why rush the vaccine at all? We knew in 2020 that plenty of things could treat COVID-19.
Well, probably because there was no consensus in the medical community. Again, you have a line in the middle, discussion point, and people who have the same pedigree taking different sides of an argument.
Yeah.
So there were people who would say, yeah, I agree with you. There were established treatments, and other ones would say, no, there were not. It's fucking... Joe Rogan fell quite victim to that, it got out of control pretty rapidly. But again, what's the average person supposed to think? Should they believe that, yes, we did have treatment early on when half of the doctors or more than half the doctors were saying, no, that we didn't? A vaccine is our way through this?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot to put on people's shoulders, for sure.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I don't have the crystal ball to know, and I try not to judge people's intentions too much because I can't really know someone's intentions. All I can know is that rationally, we had treatments that was ignored, and a treatment was pushed that was obviously experimental and could be dangerous. So rationality concludes that that was all unnecessary. And the fact that people just constantly lied to themselves about it when it was obviously irrational. Like, we had treatments that were super safe. You would have to take, 12,000 milligrams of ivermectin to die, right? And you can treat COVID with 12 milligrams. Okay, so why wasn't that used? Oh, well, we didn't have enough research and we didn't have enough studies. Yes, we have antiviral papers going back 20 years. I know, I've looked at them. So it's just, and eventually you have to come to the conclusion is, well, they wanted to rush it for something, right? And maybe the vaccine passport was the reason. Maybe the control grid is the reason. I don't know. But I know that playing God and messing with RNA technology is difficult, and we should be very cautious with how we do that. Most people who took the vaccine are fine, by the way. I'm not trying to scaremonger. The vast majority of people that took it will be fine and are fine, like 85%. And for those that aren't, there are treatments that people can take that, supplementation like nattokinase that Dr. Peter McCullough talks about, or NAC and N-acetylcysteine you can take, and this reduces clots. So if people are having issues, you can take it. I've lost family members to it though. I've lost
To
family
the treatment
members
to COVID-19?
to the vaccine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have, and that's why I started talking about it so much, because we've had family members die from this, and blood clots months after having their second dose. So it's
It goes back to, again, the transparency.
Yeah.
And the unwillingness or willingness, hopefully, for people to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
If I wish there had been an allowable discussion, and again, I'm obviously not a doctor, but about mRNA vaccines.
Right.
How long have we been using them for? What have we used them for? And again, and not to paint it in either a pro or con perspective, but let's just educate people as much as humanly possible so then they can make a decision
Right.
for themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
It just seems like any discussion was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It would be tough to argue against, like, oh, there was not censorship or throttling of it. That would be
There was a lot of censorship. Yeah.
There really was. And I'm sure there are people out there who'd be like, nope, that's not the case. And it's like,
revising history now that it's over.
You're revising history. You're taking a very difficult, in my opinion at least, position to defend. And as more information comes out, it's like, God, that picture is not even being painted well. And again, it goes back to why? Why? Is it the 2030 plan? Is it this desire to erase everything, in this country and in a lot of countries hold to be dear so we can become one ecosystem?
Well, that is one. There are, in political game theory, the idea is you always have to balance all the different actors involved. So there are going to be actors like that. There are climate. We hear them. They're very open about it. Bill Gates, one example. You can literally YouTube him, and you can see him saying, we need to reduce 15% of the global population for climate change. Okay, and he's a powerful stakeholder. So, in political game theory, you're balancing people that, they're very open. We need to reduce the global population.
Did he talk about how he would recommend?
Well, he did say if we do a good job on vaccines, word for word. But I'm not going to maybe attribute that to this particular vaccine.
Yeah, I would need to see that one in context.
He was talking. I think he was just.
There are people like Hitler who would take a more, you know what I mean? Like somebody. Remove Bill Gates from that. Let's say somebody lands on that and they're like, listen, let's just talk about birth rate. We'll focus on birth rate and, take vaccine out of it. And
yes,
for the longevity of the planet, let's focus on birth control. So at least the population increase or decrease is something that we are controlling meaningfully as opposed to not paying attention to it. That's a very different thing than like, hey, we just need to reduce 15% of the population. Like, I would need some context in that statement and what he was actually advocating for.
I think he was to be fair to old Bill. He was really talking about working in Africa and working in his countries and reducing births. Yeah. And what he was really trying to do is to say, look, if we do better treatments, we can reduce overpopulation in third world countries. But I'm just saying, it's kind of looking where we are now. From when he said the statement, it's harrowingly accurate in more ways than one. But the point is that you're always balancing those actors, and then you're just balancing business interests, and there's lots of different. There's no like hegemony. The only hegemony is that they've all agreed that the only way to go forward is this 2030 agenda. That's what most have agreed. Most business, most governments, most heads of states have agreed. That's the only hegemony we can prove anyway.
What's the tipping point where the move towards that would be unstoppable?
The moment that our production capabilities are fully crippled, it becomes impossible. Not impossible, nothing's impossible, but it becomes really difficult to reverse, right? The moment that we really cannot manufacture anything anymore because of CO2, and we can't produce our own energy anymore, and our food growth is crippled, right? The key infrastructure of life, production, food, resources. The moment that that's really clamped down on, it's going to be tough to get back without some type of violent revolution, which I wouldn't want to see.
Yeah, you go back to kind of like the divisiveness. I've literally, I guess I have heard, depending on the type of media you're consuming, but I've definitely read people calling for like civil war. I'm like, listen.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Nobody wants that.
No.
Like, listen up, internet tough guy.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up. Mm-hmm. Like, you have no idea what you are asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the like absolute last thing that I would want to see occur anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if people are oblivious enough or distracted enough to allow it to get past that tipping point. Mm-hmm. But I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know either. I would like to think not, but nothing would shock me anymore. You know, I skipped past the point earlier, but when it comes to that malleability and susceptibility that's created in trauma, you know, we've all had trauma. Mm-hmm. We've all been through trauma. The problem is that you become very susceptible to new conditioning because your brain is malleable. You're in survival mode. It's necessary to reach that susceptibility, that malleability, because you have to problem solve in a very different way. You're like, where's the exit? How am I going to get out of this? The trauma creates a susceptibility to new conditioning. Now, that conditioning could be switched back on, right? We have, let's say, half the population who was reconditioned pretty quickly into new behavior, and it only dropped when they were told it was dropped. Now, half the population, I'm just using these terms broadly, I don't know the number, right? Whatever it is, 60-40, doesn't matter. A significant portion of the population only stopped wearing the masks, only stopped using the vaccine passports when they were told it was acceptable to stop. Some stopped right at the beginning and said, nope, not crossing this line, and that's good. That's the trauma creates that susceptibility that I need to follow the authority of the leadership. If I don't, I'm going to die. And it is actually a healthy trait. Goes back to what I was saying, like we wouldn't actually have survived as a species had we not said, this guy is defending the gates from the barbarians and I need to listen to him. So it's part of our evolutionary strategy as human beings, necessary.
I would change the word trauma to fear.
Yeah, and I think in this case, when it's something of this scale, I would call it a trauma. Like because this was global.
But fear is one of the ways that you can manipulate people's behavior in probably the most drastic fashion.
Yeah.
And, you know, certain things scare people differently. Mm-hmm. You know, some people are terrified of spiders and other people are terrified of COVID-19 and you know, everything in between. And those obviously aren't extreme ends because there's a whole spectrum. But yeah, if you want to elicit compliance or behavioral shifts, scaring people and then presenting them with what they're being told is the wrong choice versus what is being told is the right choice.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experiment.
Well, and the concern that I would have is that there's nothing to stop that from happening again.
Other than people's experience to what happened last time. Like I'm saying, I think if it was, so let's go down the pathway of
the next crisis.
Let's say the COVID-19 was a repurposed or rebatched flu, and it was more of an exercise to see how much we can actually contain and control people. Mm-hmm. I think they failed. They pushed it too far. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that they would have, if that's what they were doing, I don't think that they meant to do that. And my fear actually is that, let's say there is a COVID-36, mm-hmm. whatever it is, and it is actually fucking deadly. Mm-hmm. And they're like, hey,
right,
we need to socially distance. People are like, hold on, still got that thing under the table for you.
Yeah.
And like, oh, fuck. Mm-hmm. So they failed not being able to control people in the future, but they also failed on the perspective they have presented a situation that even now, or again in the future, if people are presented with, hey, like this is actually as dangerous as we're saying, they're not going to believe it. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to take the action that they would need to have a large portion of the species survive.
Yeah,
it's like a Faustian bargain. Ironic. It's terrible.
That would be very horribly ironic. But I've thought about that before, you know, and that's why I try to avoid the logical fallacy of like we can't do it ideologically. We have to look at each case, right?
Yeah.
This COVID-19 crisis that I said at the beginning was not a crisis, I wouldn't just automatically jump to that every time. I'm going to look at it case by case basis, and I think we have to.
Yeah.
But, you know, that being said, there are other things which could be just as, if not more severe. And Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum chairman, said as much when he released this Great Reset book. And that Great Reset book, he said the cyber pandemic would be the next biggest crisis. That would be
cyber pandemic.
Correct.
Tell me more.
EMP.
Let me tell you right now, that would fuck some shit up.
Yes. And that's what he said would be the next crisis, not a pandemic, but a cyber pandemic. Now, whether that's true or not is not the point is the fear that strikes into people when that happens, just in the same way any major like blackout, any major crisis that's not going to be COVID-19, boom, right back into social engineering, right back in.
Well, the EMP one is an interesting one because I think it would be a crisis, but it would be a crisis because people, again, if you go back to the hard times create hard people, which create soft times and soft people, we live in a world where, like, again, through my anxiety rectangle, I could like get food, groceries, communicate with people across the world, probably buy a car, seeing it sight unseen, airplane ticket to anywhere that I want to go. I can do all my banking. I don't even need to leave my house. You forget how to do hard shit. You forget how to maintain the necessities of life. So people become reliant upon that, and they're about as fucking tough as chewed bubblegum. You take that away from them, and it becomes a crisis because they are so reliant on other things. They're not reliant on themselves at all. It's one of the things I love about my good friend Mike Glover, who owns Fieldcraft Survival. A lot of what he's talking about is just, hey, people, like, know how to do basic shit. Prepare, like, preparation and prepping are two very different things. Like, having an understanding how to can food. I'm not saying everybody needs to know how to do that, but maybe how to find water, maybe how to navigate, maybe have a way to communicate beyond the anxiety. Like, all of those things are great, and it actually reduces the impact of that crisis. And the EMP is one that would cripple society, I think, almost more than anything else, given the society that we are now living in. And it seems like we are evolving to live into more. My personal guess is we're like 12 months away from working for robots. Like Skynet is going to become self-actualized.
Is on the way. ChatGPT is on the way.
Shit.
And
can you imagine having that when we were going to school? We got screwed. Some of the essays that thing is writing is unbelievable.
Yeah, but then because of the experience of actually having to do the work, we have these things called being able to deal with life, which is helpful. It's a helpful skill.
God, I don't like your argument.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're talking about doing the hard stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. I know, but it sucks. But guess what? It means that you don't crumble when challenges come up, And the problem is that that's what's going to happen to people. If ChatGPT is...
Well, that's why I say the EMP one, to me, is almost a larger crisis because of the cascading impact it would have.
Yeah,
people's infrastructure and life would absolutely fall apart, and they have forgotten. Like, that's how far removed, again, those generations, again, from the founding documents.
We've moved from the land.
We're so far away from it. And like, even right here, living where we live, or where I live, sorry, here in Kalispell, if you lived in New York, holy cow, like, you might be screwed from a resource perspective.
Yes.
Living here, a little bit different story. There'd be competition for resources, but you could, like, build a garden if you wanted to, if you knew how. You could go hunt for your food if you needed to, if you knew how. Like, I'm sorry, you're probably not going to be doing, what's the Will Smith movie where he's hunting deer in the I Am Legend? He's like ripping down New York streets, hunting deer with an M4 out of a Ford Mustang, I think it was. Like, maybe if it goes really off the edge, but... Yeah,
and I don't think it's going to get that bad, by the way. I got to be clear about that. Like,
I don't think it would get that bad, but I think society would absolutely come off the rails.
I think it would be, look, and I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm just saying what they're saying. I'm just saying what the people putting forward this alternative vision are saying, and just literally, putting that forward. But I would say that it would be whatever crisis was going to happen, and they're going to happen, but if certain actors involved wanted a certain outcome, as opposed to what it would have been 100 years ago, where the outcome is to keep us a strong, stable society, well, now that's no longer the assumption for certain people in power, right? That's not the assumption now. The assumption is, well, we want to change society anyway. So when crisis comes along, be it forced or natural, makes no difference, we will capitalize on it as such. We're not in the assumption anymore that we want America as we had it. The assumption is now something new. So when a crisis comes, we're always going to social engineer it towards that something new, rather than back to control, to default. And that's my concern, is that when people are in that state of fear, in that state of trauma, as I saw in real time, people switch fast. People, when I was in March 2020 doing these Facebook Lives and saying to people that this isn't what they're telling you it is, it's not as bad, and the data is going to prove that because I did a data model, people were calling me a terrorist. And I wanted to kill their grandparents and people I've known my entire life.
That's just like a cheap hyperbolic argument.
Yeah, no, I know. And I don't hold any resentment or anything. It's just People you've known your entire life can switch on you quickly if you take a stand that's against what is presented. So my thinking is, unless we can kind of, here's the thing, let's say that we're successful with this project and we get our states out of the jurisdiction of global governance, which is all I'm looking for. Well, then when crisis comes, we're like, well, your jurisdiction ends where our state begins, right? So therefore, well, we have our own energy. Montana and North Dakota have enough energy to provide for the whole country in terms of oil. Okay, so then we have our own energy supply. We've stopped you from clamping down on our energy supply, and we have our own access. So guess what? We're fine. We can take care of ourselves, and we can distribute this to other states who aren't in your agreement. And I think that's, if we have that, we have a solid foundation to not be taken advantage of, whether crisis, natural or unnatural, happens. More than anything, we just have to be the masters of our own destiny. You know, that the whole American vision, and the reason that I had so much affinity to it is because the whole idea is that, being the master of your own destiny. You know, the whole idea is to be.
That's what I love so deeply about this country.
Yeah,
is that you have the choice.
Yeah.
And some people choose to go out there and get so far out on the front leading edge, and they're creating fucking Teslas, not as like a green energy or just like evolution.
Yeah, just the idea, you know.
And other people are fat fucks with orange Cheeto stained fingers commenting on shit from their mom's basement. Yeah. And the country is designed for both. I don't think it should reward both equally, but it's designed to allow both to exist. I don't think they'll ever coexist in an amazing fashion, but I think there's room for them to coexist. Mm-hmm. What gives you the most hope in the work that you're doing?
I think actually what you brought up at the beginning, what gives me most hope is seeing how many people like woke up and resisted what was happening. And that gives me the most hope, because I saw a good 30% of the population maybe of the country in the first year. It's like, nope, that's like 120 million people. That's a lot, right? So that gives me a lot of hope. 120 million people is in itself a huge country full of great people. So that's awesome. And I think that gives me the most hope. And ultimately knowing that God's intelligent design, natural law, like we both came to the agreement, ultimately always wins out. No matter how this goes, that always wins. What I'm trying to do is just limit and mitigate the damage, because I have 3 small children. My son was born I have 3 babies under 3, 1.5, and 6 months old. And my job is to mitigate the damage so they still have a country that they can call their own when they grow up. But we're gonna win one way or another, whether it's God or us.
So other side of the equation, I asked you what gives you the most hope. What scares you the most?
The fact that my children grow up in a country where they are taught to hate who they are, to hate what they believe, and are trapped in some type of technocratic system that doesn't even allow them to produce freely, Why would you allow them to be taught those things? I won't.
But that's the answer.
Yeah.
It's one of the beauties of this country is that you have a choice.
Yeah.
Have fun going over to Afghanistan and implementing their schooling system, changing perspective on what's going to be taught. I agree that right now it might be the narrative for some, but you as a parent will still be the single most impactful and influential person that those kids will ever know.
For sure.
And you can teach them the values that you hold dear. And if they are different than the values that currently right now, I think it's more of a talking point than a reality. Mm-hmm. I do believe that what you're talking about is happening, where the narrative it's like you have to view the world through how many people you oppressed to get here, even though you weren't alive at the time of said oppression, mm-hmm. but then also spend all of your day looking for potential oppression and missteps. I land at one where I don't get it, mm-hmm. but I don't think it's permanent either. I think mm-hmm. it might be part of the evolution, but we have the ability to have impact locally.
Agreed.
And if people don't want their children to participate in that system, don't put your fucking kids in that system.
Right.
If the anxiety cube and they're living on TikTok, don't give it to them. Right. Take it away. Figure out a solution that you can control and don't outsource that shit to somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's where I think the danger begins.
Yes, abdication of responsibility is what got us here. Yeah, absolutely. And that means as a patriarch, that means as a husband, as a father, as a leader in the community. But also it just means abdication of responsibility to the state as well. The reality is that, you know, it is my job to keep my community in good order first and foremost, and that includes my family, that includes myself, right? And you know, as John Adams said, you know, the Constitution is for a moral and religious people. Now, what he meant by that is if the Constitution is going to work, right? If this limited government is going to work, you have to keep yourself in order, because if you create a vacuum, the state will fill that vacuum.
Yeah, it was never designed to save people from themselves.
Yeah.
It was an active participation
Exactly.
from the citizens.
Yes.
Not like, hey, U.S. government, where's my fill in the blank?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's like that's how you get systems that you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's it can get a little Western out there, Mark.
They fill the vacuum, don't they? So if you're not taking care of yourself and we slip away into the abyss, well, then they'll come in and they'll take control if you're not taking control. So we have to take control for sure. And it begins locally, politically, societally, for sure.
I think it begins by people looking in the mirror.
Michael Jackson. I'm looking at the man in the mirror, asking him to change.
Super weird reference.
Yeah.
That guy goes into some very kinky and weird shit. But
yes, that's true. But I guess it's still, you know, if it's true based on its own merit, I guess.
yeah, where can people find out more about what you have going on?
Website is America21century.com. And, you know, you can probably find me on social media if I'm not banned. I've been banned on multiple platforms. TikTok, they deleted my account. Twitter, I'm back on.
I feel like TikTok deleting your account is probably a good thing.
Probably for the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
the CEO just got raked over the coals.
yeah. That's funny. So, you know, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the America21century.com, just look at it, just send it to your legislators, your local legislators, get them to start enacting this. Let's just create our own little forclaves of sovereignty. And then I can retire and go back to doing other things I want to do, because politics is the last thing I wanted to do.
I have faith. I have faith that this country and that most countries in the world would never let it happen. I think they might, via not paying attention,
Mm-hmm.
or more aptly being lazy,
Mm-hmm.
let it get to the precipice. But I think it reaches a point where the people trying to throw the levers of power are the ones that end up at the bottom of the pile.
I look forward to the day we can crack open a beer when that is over.
We might be dead.
Well, if BlackRock have their way, I'll be dead sooner rather than later. But, you know, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, again,
fine.
brought to you by BlackRock. I want everybody to go look at their mutual.
Yes.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time,
Thank you,
Mark.
Andy.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.